Chapter 17:20. Lu Xiaoyi felt deep veneration for him. This ox nose had completely inherited the three pure ones' sinister and sinister character, deception's characteristics. He had thought things through very carefully, and there was no lack of whimsical ideas. But he also had his own ideas. I think we shouldn't treat this as a mere fifth ring's revenge. Look at the bigger picture. Why not pull in Zhou Xian, Heaven's Choice, Anchor Chain, and the others? In any case, they're all elite sun spirits. If we control them well, it won't be easy for them to be exposed. If we add them all together, no matter how much strength Hengyi Realm has hidden, how can it stop us? Qing Xian was somewhat moved. Is there a possibility of those realms joining forces? Want to make people feel cold without the lips? Lu Xiaoyi snorted coldly. Oh, you can even speak now? But you're using the wrong idiom. The so-called cold without the lips means that the lips and teeth grow on the same face. If we attack any other realm, there will be people worried, but only Hengyi Realm won't, because their orthodoxy has long since deviated from normal Taoism and Buddhism. So, Hengyi Realm and most of us don't share the same face. If other people's lips die, your teeth won't be cold. Qing Xian's eyes lit up. He didn't care about this guy's foul mouth. Wait, this is a good reason. If we use the excuse of exterminating other races to tarnish Hengyi Realm's reputation, vilify, and frame. Lu Xiaoyi interrupted him. Don't tell me these things. You three pure ones are the best at it. So I say, why is Hengyi Realm so tolerant? Why are they so unwilling to stand out themselves? Actually, it's because they know their orthodoxy is incompatible with the mainstream of the universe's cultivation world. They are afraid of being shouted at and beaten by everyone. We need to take advantage of this weakness of theirs, and then gather the majority to form a large force to eliminate evil and defend Taoism. It's not just for our fifth ring's revenge. Don't be so narrow-minded. We fifth ring people are open-minded. It's not good to take revenge on others so easily. Qing Xian nodded yes. How could I forget that we fifth ring people have such good character? That's right. There is no need to mention the battle of the five rings this time. This was a pure battle for the purity of the great Tao. Let me think carefully, what can I borrow? Causing public excrement? To arouse everyone's desire to defend the Tao? To show loyalty to the heavenly Tao? It was impossible to hide it from everyone, but that wasn't the problem. As long as he gave everyone a legitimate reason to make a move, an excuse, there would always be one. Hard work pays off, and conspiracies are always feared to be haunted. I have to think about it. Lu Xiaoyi clasped his hands together. All right, there's a next target. So long as the three pure ones took note of it, how could it be any good? This was actually something that he had been thinking about all this while. If they succeeded, the great cultivators of Sun God from several realms would be mobilized. The demonic beasts of Peacock Dapeng and the people of Interior Realm would be able to easily gather at least 200 to 300 top-level sun gods. When the time came, they would rush up and get a bunch of dragons to sneak into the Eternal River. That would be awesome. The two guys with a belly full of evil tricks were still thinking about their wicked ideas when the 3-second severance great elites on the other side stepped out together. The cloud boards rose, and the spiritual conference officially began. Over 100 cultivators sat in a cross-legged manner, and there were celestial birds carrying fine wine and celestial fruits. This was the basic etiquette of the spiritual conference. From this aspect, the 3-second severance great elites were all fastidious people. Of course, this bit of effort was nothing to them. Ancient techniques, everything followed the ancients. Though ancient cultivators were the most unrestrained in their actions, that was referring to their concept of cultivation. In terms of cultivation etiquette, ancient techniques were actually the most strict and even a little inflexible. This was also the dual nature of ancient techniques. Thus, it was rare for Interior Realm Heaven to have spiritual conferences, but when it did, it would be very formal and would not tolerate some mischievous behavior. Stream, a ravine sandwiched between two mountains. At the end of the ravine, there was a massive protrusion of green rock, and its location, Lu Xiaoyi thought with some malice. Look at this place that had been chosen. For someone like him who had a more unique sense of beauty, the whole flying crossing stream was a ravine in the middle, and they were now in the ravine. The ravine was divided into two sides. On the right side were several dozen spectating cultivators. Among them, there were first severance cultivators, and they were the rare ones who liked to watch a show. There were also those who had not yet severed their yang god, and they wanted to experience the great Tao of natural Tao through this kind of observation. There was no way to achieve Tao, and those who had achieved it were the first. Though they were all very old, between 4,000 and 5,000 years old, it did not mean that they would avoid learning from these young freaks who were around 2,000 years old. Without this spirit, without casting aside honor and disgrace, you would not be able to continue walking. On the left side were the main characters of this spiritual conference, 62 young freaks. The common characteristic was that they had all taken a step forward, but there were differences in their cultivation levels. Most of them were primordial divinity, and there were over 40 of them. They had broken through the door of half immortal when they were in the primordial divinity tier, and had caused their own cultivation levels to be in an awkward mess. Among them were Lu Xiaoyi, Qin Xian, Shuofeng, Yuming Zi, and the others, who were the mainstream. There were also over a dozen yang gods. They had all successfully taken a step forward when they were breaking through to the yang god tier at the same time, and were also the ones with the highest true strength among this group of people. However, they had already completely met the interior realm heaven's recognition of the qualifications of cultivators, so this group of people could not leave. Unless there was a change in heaven and earth, and the immortal court changed its course, they could only stay here and cultivate, just like those seniors. There was also a yin god. This was a true freak. No one knew how he had managed to take a step forward when he was only a yin god. He was so young, and it was truly inconceivable. The cloud board rang 9 times, and innumerable celestial birds flapped their wings and flew, creating a man-made celestial atmosphere in the misty mountain stream. This was only the castrated version of the opening ceremony. It was said that in the real ancient era, such ceremonies had small spiritual conferences with 9 procedures, and large spiritual conferences with 19 procedures. There was celestial music, ringing bells, golden lotuses sprouting from the ground, sweet rain from the sky, auspicious beasts reporting good news, fairies singing and dancing, and so on. Of course, times had changed, and even now, the cultivation world did not advocate such ceremonies. Even in the interior realm, everyone made do with what was available, and simply expressed that they valued it, but no one really did any research on this set of procedures. Once the ceremony was over, the 3 great cultivators in charge stood up. On the left was Gu Chan, on the right was Yang Wang, and on the left was Wu Ma. They were all humans, and this was a bit incorrect in cultivation, but in the interior realm, there was nothing they could do. There were no great elites with spiritual treasures, and second severance demonic beasts couldn't be bothered to come. Fortunately, the participants were all humans, so they had to make do. At least the Taoism and Buddhism were complete. The contest for natural great Tao was basically limited to humans. Spiritual treasures and demonic beasts were not good at this, so it was useless even if they came. They would just be blinded by anger, so they might as well not come. The old Taoist Yang Guang took a step forward, his voice calm and distant. Using divine sense in this kind of occasion was not solemn, and there was no sense of ceremony, so he still followed the ancient precedent and used roaring. The universe changes, and the heavenly Tao changes. Everything is renewed, and the effects are far and far away. We are very fortunate, striking water in the midst of the current. We should work hard and benefit the world. Since we are here, we should take things as they come. Under the great Tao, there is no such thing as carelessness. The contest for natural great Tao depends on each's own ability. Thus, those who are interested in natural great Tao can announce their names in public and declare their Tao with the intention of fair competition. This is a good start. Chapter 17:21. What Yangon said was very clear. For these competitors of the innate great Tao, They couldn't care less about other places, but since they were in the interior heaven, they had to abide by a fair and just competition environment. What was fair and just? If one looked at it from the ancient rules, it would be fair and above board. The winner wouldn't be happy, and the loser wouldn't be discouraged. They had to maintain a relatively pure atmosphere of Tao. Of course, such a rule was simply impossible to achieve in the present. Cultivators nowadays were very practical. There was no such thing as you and I are competing for the same Tao. If you succeed, I will give you my blessings. My blade is already chopped down. But what it meant here was that even if you wanted to fight, you had to do it in an atmosphere of rules, such as a fair competition and not a group fight, sneak attack, digging holes, sprinkling lime powder, or calling your parents to call your friends. In order to achieve this, people who hid their heads and tails and deceived the world couldn't be tolerated. Everyone had to put out their general origin and make it public to show their selflessness. This was the rule of the ancient competition. One couldn't impersonate, couldn't replace. Of course, it was just a general idea. One couldn't completely expose one's family background. There were 3 powerful people here, and under the constraints of the rules of the interior heaven, lying here would lead to consequences. With a wave of his hand, a cultivator immediately responded. For a cultivator who had reached this step, even if you asked him to fake, he wouldn't know how to do it. Why bother if he lost his state of mind for no reason? A newly promoted first strike of Sun God stood up proudly and said in a loud voice, "I'm Duan Li of the Western Heaven, determined to destroy the great Tao. I'm willing to accept the title of Prince of Destruction." Lu Xiaoyi understood. There was no need to go into detail about one's origin. His name, East, West, North, South, and the innate great Tao he loved were just these 3 rough descriptions. It also showed his identity and respected privacy. But there were also some who didn't understand. "Prince of Destruction, what's this?" North Wind softly explained. In ancient times, when a cultivator was unique in a certain field and achieved extraordinary results, people would often give him the title a child of the heavenly Tao, child of the heavenly Tao, child of the heavenly Tao, child of the universe, etc. We are now competing for the innate Taos, and there are as many as 36 of them. Directly calling them the child of destruction, child of 5 elements, or child of yin and yang isn't appropriate. Firstly, it's disrespectful to the heavenly Tao, and secondly, there are other competitors, so we'll call them princes. It means that they have the potential to inherit the throne, but there is more than one prince. These are all ancient precedents, so it's a bit ridiculous to talk about them now. But since we're in the interior heaven and we're practicing the ancient methods, we can only do as the Romans do. For example, I can only be the immemorial prince, your rival Ma Bailu is the yin-yang prince, and so on. Lu Xiaoyi pursed his lips. There were many things worth learning about ancient cultivation, but there were also many things that made people feel awkward. Forget it. It's not good to be too unconventional. Like what Qin Xin said, it's safer to go with the flow and not attract attention. Nantian Hong Tiangang is willing to accept the position of Wanjun Prince. Wanjun was another name for thunder. This person was actually a cultivator of the Tao of Thunder. Eastern Heaven Elian is willing to accept the position of Dendrobium Prince. Northern Heaven Third Watch is willing to accept the position of Rooster Prince. Eastern Heaven Jin Yao is willing to accept the position of Bumei Prince. Dendrobium was a type of spiritual herb. It was also known as the grass of immortality and the grass of resurrection. It actually meant reincarnation. The crowing of the rooster was the time when day and night changed. The meaning of the third watch was that I cultivated the great Tao of time. It was just that I used a hidden and unique term to replace it. It was a respect for the great Tao. It was also the norm for cultivators who liked writing and writing. It was just like this person who didn't talk about people. He had to talk about this guy, this bird, this dog head, this plague. It was the same principle. Bumei Prince referred to the Tao of karma. Buddhism had the saying of Bumei Prince and Bumei Prince about karma. Bumei Prince meant that there was no karma, and the evil that he had done in the past would not be repaid. Bumei Prince meant that he understood the karma that he had received, and he clearly knew what karma he had received in the past. He had to face it calmly and never avoid it. Therefore, this Bume prince not only explained the Tao he practiced, but also his attitude towards karma. These people spoke in a vague way, and there was a hidden meaning. Uncultured people wouldn't be able to understand. Lu Xiaoyi had a hard time listening to them, and he felt disdain in his heart. They didn't speak in human language and had to beat around the bush. As they introduced themselves one by one, half of them were biting on words. It was a taboo, and it was also a kind of ideological respect for the Tao of heaven. It was also a reflection of their personality. For example, those cultivators who practiced killing, destruction, life and death, and strength would directly address themselves without any scruples. It was a kind of attitude towards cultivation. Soon, it was Lu Xiaoyi's turn. He couldn't avoid this, and he had to try. Eastern Heaven's cigarette stub is willing to accept the position of Frog Prince. Frog Prince? What kind of Tao was this? Even if the group of eminent monks were knowledgeable and learned from Fu Douche, they still couldn't figure out what Tao was related to frogs. Looking at the suspicious eyes of the crowd and Qing Xian's murderous gaze, he shook his sleeves and calmly recited, "The frogs croak in the pond. The plum blossoms bloom in the early rain. The quiet heart has no work, only a groundless fate." This poem accurately described the scene of the frogs croaking after the rain and the cultivators calmly enjoying themselves. As for whether the frogs croaked or not, it might or might not. It was purely based on the mood of the listener. It turned out to be a groundless Tao. Then what was groundless? No one knew. This person could be recognized by interior heaven with this Tao. Interesting. Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian had different ideas. Qing Xian only wanted to act in the dark, but he knew that in the cultivation world, the dark would never be able to suppress the light. If you want people to follow you, you have to take out something that will make people's eyes light up. You have to be high profile, so high profile that people can't see through your trump card. Only then can you successfully arouse people's curiosity. This was not easy, and he could not use too rough means because everyone here was elegant. It was impossible to use vulgar things to convince them. Even if he beat them until their heads were full of bumps, they would still not be convinced. Since this was the case, you could only use an unconventional method. Don't they all like to talk about literature? Then he would also talk about it. At least he could get some recognition. In the future, even if he killed people with his sword, they would think that it was elegant killing. On the other hand, if he used violence first and then talked about literature, he would be pretending to be cultured. It was two completely different concepts. This was the role of the first impression. It was very important. Choosing any of the 36 innate Taos was a problem for him because he would meet his opponents. There was no innate Taos that only he could cultivate. Therefore, choosing any of the 12 Taos that he was proficient in was troublesome because it meant that he didn't dare to expose the other Taos. He could only choose groundless. It could be this, it could be that. You think it's this, but I'm actually that. In order to not hinder his ability, no matter what you suspect, I'll refute you with groundless. In fact, his groundless meant that he had all of them. Chapter 17:22. Lu Xiaoyi used this method to attract the attention of everyone present in an instant, because no matter what other people chose, it would be within their expectations. However, this groundless choice was truly inexplicable. What's more, interior Jingtian even admitted that it was different. Who has ever seen a groundless lie? Who had a grudge with the great Tao? Where was the theoretical basis for this? Where the actual effects? It was completely groundless. One in the light and one in the dark. That was the strategy he and Qing Xian had adopted. Without a doubt, Qing Xian could only go to the dark side, because he knew very well that as long as this pretentious criminal showed off a little, whether it was attracting hatred or applause, it would be 100 times better than his planning. This was because of his personality, and it could not be changed. After the 62 people had registered, the basic situation was clear. According to the 4 symbols heavens, there were 16 azure dragons from the eastern sky, 17 white tigers from the western sky, 14 vermilion bird from the southern sky, and 15 black tortoises from the northern sky. They were basically balanced, with a slight difference. The East and West were the strongest. The differences between the Great Daos were also revealed. The 36 Great Daos were divided equally among the 62 people, but there were still a few Great Daos that were missing. Destiny, morality, and Tai were all part of the 5 truths, 5 virtues, and 5 fates. Of course, this did not mean that no one was prepared to combine these Great Daos. It was just that no one had come. There were tens of millions of cultivators in the universe. Not to mention 36 Great Daos. Even 360 Great Daos were not left behind. Among them, most of them were preparing to combine the 5 elements. There were a total of 5 people, which showed the status of the 5 elements in the universe's self-cultivation world. Thus, there were 5 element princes. In order to distinguish them, they were also called golden princes, water princes, earth princes, and so on. There were also quite a number of yin and yang cultivators. There were 4 of them, including Ma Bailu and Qing Xian. Then there were 3 cultivators of the massacre Dao, and so on. Most of the innate Dao had 2 cultivators, and there were very few exceptions. However, Lu Xiaoyi was an exception. It was hard to guess the difficulty of his cultivation. Could it be difficult? But could it be a new innate Dao? Many people at the meeting had their own guesses about this. Rangoon waited for everyone to introduce themselves before he spoke again. In the world of cultivation, the old will be replaced with the new. The purpose of the ancient methods of the interior is to never suppress new forces. The strong will rise while the weak will fall. Therefore, we're the insiders while others are the outsiders. Therefore, the universe will change and eventually return to the Tao of ancient Tao. This is our perseverance and also a gift from the heavens. My Tao is not lonely. It should be everlasting. The crowd laughed. They were mocking the exterior masters, which was human nature. Professions were always full of discrimination, just like how cavalrymen mocked infantrymen. Infantrymen mocked archers, and archers mocked cavalrymen. Since this is the Dharma assembly, it is regrettable that I cannot speak for everyone. However, the path of the great Tao cannot be misled. Everyone here has their own tricks. We are old, so we won't embarrass ourselves. However, there will be a day when interior heaven will be proud of you. On the day when the epoch changed, this place would become a golden immortal, the cradle of a golden immortal. I hope that when that day comes, you will not forget about this place. Let the interior sky become the only place where legends set sail in the universe. He was good at talking and stirring up emotions, but that was basically the attitude of most of the old cultivators in the interior realm. The matter was clear. To those first severance and second severance old cultivators, their superego had long since been fixed, and their Tao traditions could not be changed, so they could not deny their own several thousand years of history because of this, right? Thus, their future was still fixed. Human immortal, true immortal. They could not compare to these freaks who followed the will of the heavens. The superego of these people had to be at least a golden immortal. Since that was the case, there was no conflict, and there was no need to make things difficult for them. Who knew which radish would bloom here? Which iron tree would sprout? If they offended them, they would be unlucky in the future, and the Tao traditions behind them would not be able to escape. Thus, the overall way of thinking of the interior realm was more considerate of these people, which was why when Lu Xiaoyi first came here, he actually did not encounter any real opposition. There was a deep internal reason for this. They had to give them some benefits so that they would remember the good of the interior realm. They could not one day come back to seek revenge after ascending to heaven, nor could they allow them to fight to the death in the interior realm and mess up the rules here. In the end, they would drag in the masters behind them and cause great chaos in the interior realm. In order to settle these restless seeds of potential, in the end, after a discussion among the second severance great elites of the interior realm, they reluctantly came up with this kind of conference. Yangon and the other 2 would take the lead and use some kind of reward to tie them down. To these people, it was not something that could be fooled by ordinary things. Even Ziqing could not. It needed very special things. Yangon announced, There are two agreements of the interior realm, and they have been approved by the majority of the permanent cultivators of the interior realm. Firstly, in the next announcement of the immortals, we will specially leave 6 optimal positions for you to satisfy your requirements of observing and studying the immortals. Secondly, every time a fragment of the Great Tao collapses, there will be a certain number of fragments directly flying into the interior and exterior realm. We have prepared 12 fragments for the first few times for the enthusiasts to observe and study. Once these 2 rewards were mentioned, they immediately attracted everyone's interest. The announcement of the immortals, this was a scene that could not be seen even in the exterior realm. This was not the ordinary content of Foundation building rising to Jin Dan rising to Yuanying, or Yuanying rising to True Lord. This was ascension to immortality, and in the background of the present era, a grand event that might not happen even once in 10,000 years. What it meant to cultivators, only those who had reached their level would understand. Even if the announcement of the immortals had nothing to do with their own path of cultivation, this process in itself meant many things. This was the most attractive aspect of the interior realm. Originally, this kind of viewing position needed to be fought for with strength. Though they had great potential, potential was not strength. In a situation where there were many second severance great elites in the interior realm, they could not squeeze to the front at all. Not to mention that there were even more first severance young god that had lived for tens of thousands of years. 6 positions, 62 people, were very important to each and every one of them. The fragments were also precious. Among them, not everyone had obtained a fragment of the Great Tao, and there was also a portion that had purely relied on their own efforts to take the step. Their pursuit of Great Tao was endless, and no matter what the next fragment was, it would be a very rare reference. This meant that aside from their own goal of merging with Tao, everyone had more or less dabbled in other natural Great Tao. There was no one like Lu Xiaoyi who did not pull a single one, but it was very common for each person to dabble in 4 or 5 Great Tao. This was related to their actual battle prowess. The heavenly Tao was indeed very fond of the interior and exterior realm, not forgetting to send some over here when they dropped these things. Or perhaps it was because this place was more special that the fragments unconsciously flew here. As for how many fragments there were, the old cultivators would not tell the truth, unless one day you also reached the second severance. But 12 fragments, 12 places, was already very dafa. Chapter 17:23. No one said anything. They just waited quietly because it was obvious. There were 62 people, and the 2 rewards were only given to 6 people. Since there were 12 people, there would definitely be a way to fight for it. These people were used to competing since they were young. They had been competing for 2,000 years and had never lost. If they couldn't compete with others, they wouldn't be able to come here. Therefore, they were all very confident. Others would be afraid of difficulties, but they wouldn't because they had already adapted to this kind of cultivation rhythm. The Great Tao was to be fought for. Yangon pointed outside the stream. The reason why we chose to hold the Dharma conference at the Flying Crossing stream is because of the special environment here. This space was the famous whirlpool space of the interior realm. Due to some special and mysterious reasons, it was difficult for the immortals to fly out on their own once they moved here. Unless other immortals squeezed in, then under the influence of the Space Force, one of them would be pushed out. Just before the new year, one immortal entered. So at least in the next 10 years, there will not be any immortals squeezed out. There are almost 100 immortals here. Each of you can choose one. If you can help this immortal fly out of the whirlpool within 10 years, it will be considered a success. The first 6 to do so will be rewarded with the position of immortal and the fragment. The next 6 will only be rewarded with the fragment. As for the rest, they can only blame themselves for not being capable enough and have no one to blame. They all understood. Lu Xiaoyi looked around. Around the Flying Crossing stream, there were indeed almost 100 immortals. Because they could not fly out of the whirlpool, no one was willing to stay in such a place to cultivate. This kind of competition was actually the normal way of ancient cultivation. It was not as simple and violent as it was now. He did not like this kind of competition, but he had no choice. Of course, there were many people like him who were dissatisfied with this kind of competition. After all, they were all cultivators of this era who were used to fighting and violence. They had long forgotten what gentleness was. This kind of competition was most suitable for Orthodox Taoism. Buddhism could do it too. Yangon had steered the situation in the direction that was most beneficial to his orthodoxy, without revealing anything. Even in the interior heaven, this kind of scheming was everywhere, but you couldn't say anything about it. After all, you were practicing ancient methods. The content of this spiritual assembly was much simpler than expected. There was only one content, but it was also very complicated because it would take 10 years to complete. Guchan opened his mouth. This isn't making things difficult for you. In the interior heaven, every second severance cultivator would be able to achieve this, regardless of the orthodoxy. Among them, the fastest would not even take more than a year. With your talent, 10 years is already very lenient. If you still can't accomplish this, it can only mean that there has been a deviation in the direction of great Tao. You can achieve the first severance, but may not necessarily be able to achieve the second severance. The universe is changing, and the epochs are changing. We believe that this means that cultivators should pay more attention to the essence of the universe, to the Tao, and not to the arts. The cloud boards sounded again. Everyone knew that the time had come. It was time to find an immortal sect that was suitable for them, but no one was in a hurry. It was as if they wouldn't be able to find a good one if they were late. They all had a very good state of mind and knew their limits. They were in the lead now, but 10 years later, they might not be in the lead. Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian gathered together, and Lu Xiaoyi scratched his head. Ma Lu, you three pure ones are the best at this. Anyway, one is rushing, two is also dragging. Why don't you help me drag mine out as well? I get a headache when I see this kind of test topic. It's so unpleasant and so wishy-washy. Why don't we set up a fighting ring and let everyone fight to see? Not only can we quickly determine the winner and loser, we can also eliminate dissidents and take revenge. Yet Qing Xian had no intention of helping at all. Why should I? I don't owe you anything. These people are all good fighters and are not weaker than you and me. Do you think this is Zhou Xian? Can you chase away rabbits by hugging grass? Instead of helping you, both of us can't eat meat. Why don't I try it alone? Maybe I can even get something. You're used to eating big fish and big meat. This time, just treat it as a meal to clear your stomach and let others eat their fill. You can't take all the good things, right? He had no sense of loyalty at all. Qing Xian also knew that he could not count on him. In fact, he was just saying. The two of them slowly looked for a suitable immortal as they discussed the people they saw just now. Zhou Xian doesn't seem to be an Eastern Heaven's green dragon. You three pure ones are sneaky. How many of these people do you know? Do you match up with the boundaries we're familiar with? Lu Xiaoyi asked. Qing Xian knew that he would ask this question. Indeed, although this fellow had been to more places than him, he had always been fighting alone. How could his knowledge be compared to the three pristines, a Taoist orthodoxy that was everywhere in the universe? He was very cautious. Zhou Xian belongs to Northern Heaven's Black Tortoise. To be honest, I'm not sure if any of them came here. If they did, they should have come here before Zhou Xian's defensive battle. Otherwise, I would have known. I only know 4. One is Light World's One Curtain, Prince Dendrobium. There's also one in Yangding, Prince Jinyao. There must be some in Floating and Sinking World and Anchor Chain World. I don't know who they are, and I don't know if they have come to Inner Heaven. There's also Northern Heaven's Third Watch, Prince Foul Crow. But in fact, this person is from Heaven's Choice Continent. They are very close to Zhou Xian. So when they come out of the negative space, they're considered to be in Northern Heaven's territory. The last one you have to pay attention to is Eastern Heaven's marching monk, Prince Nirvana. There's evidence that he was the leader of the last battle of the 5 rings. He was the strategist. Lu Xiaoyi was a little surprised. It's okay. I'll find a chance to kill him. I want to know if this person will be reborn after Nirvana. This guy is also a primordial spirit. I always thought he was a sun spirit. Ma Lu, Didn't you always say that I like to eat alone and not be a good friend? I won't eat this time. I'll leave this person to you. I'm just curious that there are people from Heaven's Choice. This is really lively. Qing Xian disagreed. You can't chew on him, and you leave him to me? I can't deal with him now. It's better for you to do it. I don't blame you for eating alone. As for Heaven's Choice, they would naturally come. The Heaven's Choice continent had infiltrated the origin world for a long time. The boldest, most radical, and most promising ones were sent to the origin world to cultivate by the various nations of Heaven's Choice continent when their morals collapsed and the heavenly Tao showed signs of collapsing. They were sent to the origin world by the various nations of Heaven's Choice continent to cultivate. Some of them were sent to the origin world by Heaven's Choice, while others had secret cultivation planets. With Heaven's Choice's massive strength, it wasn't difficult for them to do this. And I thought that he wasn't the only one who came. There must be at least one of his companions in Northern Heaven. After all, Heaven's Choice is really too big. These seeds were not mobilized even when Heaven's Choice launched a realm war. It can be seen that their scheme is deep and extraordinary. Chapter 1724. Why do you only know opponents? Don't you have friends? Don't they know you and me? Lu Xiaoyi said with dissatisfaction. Marching monk, the archenemy of Buddhism in the main world, knowing bird of Yongding, a realm plundered by the fifth ring, a bitter hatred, Ilian, an enemy of the realm of light. Third watch, from Heaven's Choice, an unknown faction. Qing Xin shrugged. I find it strange too, but it's better than only knowing friends and not enemies. At least I won't be assassinated. They probably don't know me because I don't know these people directly. I got the news from my sect, but I can't guarantee that they know you. Who asked you, Great Sword Immortal Lu, to wander the universe and spread your fame far and wide? If you pretend to be weak for too long, you'll naturally be struck by lightning. It's only right and proper. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. He couldn't live like this, but he had caused so many things down there. He didn't expect to be able to keep a low profile in interior heaven. That was why he had started with a coquettish poem. He knew he couldn't hide it, so he might as well do it openly. Qing Xian was well aware of this. She had to say that this thing was really too cunning. It seems that before we understand the situation, we shouldn't recruit people with great fanfare. It's too easy to expose ourselves. We need to find an opportunity. Qing Xian nodded. We'll take advantage of the situation. There's no need to rush. I think we can actually put our energy on the more distant celestial skies. It's better not to come into contact with these people from Eastern Heaven for the time being. I'll think of another way to see if I can open up a gap or two. From the martial arts, there are quite a few pure Taoists among these people from Eastern Heaven. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. The sword vein could never compare to a Tao vein like the three pure ones. Its foundation spread throughout the universe, making people speechless. He actually didn't want to spend too much effort in this area. Ever since Zhou Xian came out, he once again put his energy on his own cultivation. He no longer thought about how to pull people together to start a large-scale war. As long as he had enough strength, so what if he was alone? He could still enter and exit Hung River and kill them all. However, it would take time for his strength to grow. Since Qing Xian was willing to put in effort in this aspect, he would just let him be. He only needed to come up with ideas from the side. After all, such an extermination of the planet was very important to establish the image of the fifth ring, and it would not take too long. The overall structure of the whirlpool was like a large basin of water that was constantly rotating. Because of the high speed, the water in the basin was flung against the walls of the basin, but it was blocked by the walls. The nearly 100 immortals were in the same situation. They were all flung against the walls of the basin, but for some mysterious reason, they could not come out. Therefore, every immortal world was very close to flying out of the whirlpool, but it was this thin layer of obstruction that prevented them from flying out. What the cultivators needed to do was to help the immortals complete this last step. Each of them had their own ideas, each of them had their own tricks, but the most basic was still determined by the level of immersion in the state of Tao convergence. For example, Qing Xian could only use his yin and yang ability Beifeng could only use his Hunyuan ability, and so on. The two of them walked around for a few days, and Qin Xian found an immortal world that was more suitable for the Tao state of Yin-Yang. It seemed that the Celestials who became immortals here mainly focused on this aspect. He was not picky and did not think about whether there would be more suitable ones later. I'm here. I'll look for more. You should stay away from me. Otherwise, when I see that you've achieved nothing, I'll be soft-hearted and help you. In the end, both of us will fail. Lu Xiaoyi left speechlessly. He couldn't keep this friend anymore. He continued to walk around because he really had no requirements for the immortal's choice. It seemed to be all right, but also seemed to be unsuitable because these immortals' worlds were arranged closely together. They were thrown into a circle, so it didn't take too long to make a trip down. In a month, he had basically looked through them all, but still couldn't make up his mind. In truth, he was just lazy and felt that this kind of competition was really meaningless, so he just wanted to lie down. Only by lying down would he not be bored and compete in Tao state strength, and not be manipulated by others on this day. He found that he had returned to the starting point, flying across the stream. The 3-second severance great elites had long since disappeared, leaving behind only a group of spectators who were leisurely there. They formed groups and slowly evaluated the choices of these freaks. From this, they judged their insight and knowledge, whether their concept of cultivation was mature, and whether they were worthy of the preferential treatment that the interior realm heaven had given them. He slowly followed them and listened to their evaluation. He felt that what they said was very reasonable, as expected of an old fox who had been in the interior realm for a long time. Their insights were penetrating. This little guy's choice of immortals is not bad. Yin and Yang with the 5 elements, twice the result with half the effort. Using the power of Yin and Yang to pry open the 5 elements of immortals' worlds, it's a little interesting. How did this idiot choose? Lightning chose the mountain of pure earth. Is he trying to cut off his own path? These young gods or first severance had at least a lifespan of 4,000 to 5,000 years and had been in the interior realm for a long time, so they had rich experience in this field. Of course, experience could not replace the ideas of genius, but no matter how talented you were, you had to admit that in many aspects, experience had an unparalleled effect. Lu Xiaoyi followed at the back and mixed in with the crowd, nodding as he listened, and in the end, he even interrupted and asked if he did not understand. This attitude was very good, but the key was his identity. Why do I feel that you look a little familiar? I remember now, brat. Aren't you that frog prince? Your cultivation is groundless. Why don't you work hard yourself and come here to mingle with us idlers? A first severance elder finally saw the problem. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. Isn't it because I don't know what to do? Since you don't know, why do you have to stick out your butt and pretend? If you have the time to waste, why don't you listen to the comments of these elders? At least you can learn something. I'm not breaking the rules, right? The elder laughed loudly. An honest person, even if he was pretending, had his own merits. Actually, in this kind of competition, it was far from being fair because natural great Tao were different and their scope of use was naturally different. In this kind of competition, those who specialized in the 5 elements and yin and yang would have a great advantage, and there were some great Tao that were completely inappropriate here. For example, fate, reincarnation, karma, and so on. Wanting to move a celestial world was extremely difficult. One's Tao understood. This was something that could only be done when one reached a certain cultivation level, and was far from what a first severance could do. So, from the beginning of this kind of competition, certain results were destined. This was not Yangon deliberately making things difficult for anyone or being biased. But in the cultivation world, it was also very difficult to find a completely fair competition method. There would always be those who suffered losses, and there would always be those who gained advantages. It was inevitable. Even if everyone fought together, would it be fair? Not necessarily. Not every great Tao concept was skilled in battle. Chapter 1725. Lu Xiaoyi followed this group of idlers and commented. He didn't treat himself as a contestant at all. No one forced him. If he didn't fight for his own benefits, who should worry about him? On the contrary, many people were willing to discuss with him because of his strange and unprecedented groundless theory. What exactly is groundless? A first Severance half-immortal asked. Lu Xiaoyi said everything he knew. It means that there may be, and there may not be. Then do you know whether you have it or not? What do you have? Seniors, if I really know whether I have it or not, and what I have, would it still be groundless? In my opinion, groundless seems to be muddle-headed. Muddle-headed? Dazed. Muddle-headed? A sun god laughed and scolded. You might as well say that you're an idiot. Lu Xiaoyi didn't get angry and said seriously, it's a little like that. So, I feel that this groundless theory can't be taken too seriously. If you can deal with it, then deal with it. If you can fool it, then fool it. Muddle through, so be it. As long as you're a monk, you can strike the bell. If you have wine today, you could drink today. Don't. He wasn't deliberately acting funny here. He had nothing better to do. He had his own ideas on how to rope in these interior half-immortals to work for him. In his opinion, this world was a world of human relationships. Human relationships were everywhere, especially for someone like him who might put himself in a position where he would be the center of attention in the future. This was especially important. Mortals had human relationships, and so did cultivators. Don't think that half-immortals didn't have these vulgar things. They also had them, but they were hidden very deeply and didn't leave any traces. Directly looking for those young monsters was too direct, too imprudent, too unskillful. It was easy for people to judge that you approached with ulterior motives, so he began to find another way. Did half-immortal cultivators really have so much leisure time to watch these young people's performance? They had lived for tens of thousands of years and had seen the announcements of the immortals countless times. Would they suddenly have the mood to watch the childish performances of young people? They might have a future, but now was the present. There was no doubt about the inevitable gap between young people and old immortals in this era. Then why were there dozens of half-immortals and sun gods following them? If one were to look at it from the perspective of human feelings, there was one factor that could not be ignored, and that was that these people had some sort of relationship with these young monstrous geniuses, whether in the light or in the dark. The same Tao, orthodoxy, same domain, or a special personal relationship. In other words, this could be a group of idlers, but it could also be a group of relatives and friends. When it came to interpersonal relationships, if it wasn't suitable to be straightforward, then it was best to make use of the person's family and friends. It's just like how if you can't handle a woman, you can first go after her parents. If he could leave a good impression in the eyes of these people, he would be honest, frank, and a little muddle-headed. Furthermore, his path towards the Tao did not conflict with others. Therefore, he would leave a good impression on these old guys who liked to teach others. They would definitely fall for this trick, because if they didn't fall for this trick, they wouldn't have come at all. They would let their own juniors charge in, and they wouldn't care even if they died, just like White Tiger. Since they had come, it meant that they were willing to accept this. They were also choosing suitable allies for their juniors or their orthodoxies in the main world. This was very important because they couldn't go down, but these young people could. Therefore, what immortals? How could he gain as much as hanging out with these old guys? He only needed to humbly ask countless questions, regardless of whether they were childish or not. He had to listen with all his attention, and he couldn't appear too stupid. When it was time to show off his ability to comprehend, he had to show it fully. In this way, a vivid image of a diligent and inquisitive young man would be established. The old guys would be full of interest because of their exploration of the Tao. They wouldn't have the chance to practice it themselves, but they would realize their own Tao deductions through this young man who was very easy to talk to. This was a win-win situation. The old guys would gain face, and they would also have the chance to verify what they had learned. Lu Xiaoyi would gain benefits. Among the countless suggestions, there were actually many true insights. Moreover, he wasn't afraid of being led astray, because he knew very well what his own Tao was. In the end, after interacting with each other, he would turn from an unfamiliar junior to a good student, and then from a good student to a friendly junior. Finally, by chance, he would be recommended to the real juniors, and they would go to the main world to help each other. Of course, if it was a coincidence, they would help each other fight or something. This was the reason why he was hanging out with these old guys. As if he was also a bystander, he flew over one by one, commenting on the performance of each contestant, and asked his own questions. However, this group of old men and women were obviously more concerned about his groundless questions. Because the tenure period was just about to begin, and because they were already familiar with the things of these juniors, they were more concerned about new things, such as the groundless questions that they had never seen before. In such a mood, the emperor wasn't anxious, but the eunuchs were. The group of people was quickly divided into two factions, and they couldn't come to an agreement. One faction thought that groundless questions were the culmination of the innate Tao, and they needed to come into contact with a broader Tao. The other faction thought that groundless questions were groundless questions, and they should start by comprehending a brand new Tao. The quarrel became more and more intense, and the two factions were divided into many small factions. In the end, it became like the chicken had a mouth and the duck a mouth. There were as many old guys as there were different directions. As the focus of the dispute, he acted as if nothing had happened. He only humbly put on two ears, one in charge of entering, the other in charge of exiting, but soon his leisure was no longer there. Immediately find an immortal world. It's useless to say more. Let's do it. A half-immortal with a more explosive temper shouted loudly. Yes, it's better to listen to 100 opinions than to listen to one. Just follow my method, and there's no need to try anything else. When dozens of half-immortals and young spirits vented their anger on him, he was also moved Fatsi. May I ask, seniors, which immortal world is more suitable for this junior? Seeing that another quarrel was about to start, Lu Xiaoyi also knew that going too far was as bad as falling short, and he couldn't let this situation continue. Since it's groundless, then this junior will just randomly choose one. I won't talk about compatibility or foundation, and I'll just try it one by one and see what's the difference. Go quickly. Everyone's time is very precious. Lu Xiaoyi casually found a seat that was far away from the others and directly landed, not even having time to take a closer look at where this place was. Only after landing did he vaguely see three words in the extremely dilapidated cave entrance. Mount Laojun. Chapter 17:26. Lu Xiaoyi didn't feel anything, but the group of old guys outside was a little silent. Since when did the Immortals, a place that no one dared to enter, get involved in the whirlpool? However, their fear was short-lived. After all, the person was no longer here. Moreover, the one who offended Mount Laojun was not them, but that inexplicable groundless thing. Under their guidance, Lu Xiaoyi vowed to be a good student to the end. He had no intention of working hard himself because, in his opinion, the contents of the two rewards were not attractive to him. If he wanted to see the announcement of the Immortals, couldn't he kill his way in? As for the Great Tao Fragment, he had never worried about it since the merit fell. Relatively speaking, gathering a group of people to go down and fight was more important. He had long understood that right and wrong in the universe, and who was right and who was wrong, were not important. What was important was that you had to rope in the majority and attack the minority. Don't be a lone hero. You had to occupy the moral high ground. The general provoked alone, and the result was a tragedy. The great emperor had some strategies, but he didn't grasp the key point. Crow ancestors succeeded, right? But the price was too high. Their common characteristic was that they singled out the sword vein. This was very dangerous. It might bring glory to the swordsman, but it would put him in danger. Lu Xiaoyi would not do this. One had to know that the sword vein was not the only thing that he wanted to change. Who didn't want to change? Hoping to get more in the future? Who didn't have their own desires? You only need to lure out everyone's desires, merge them, and strengthen them to form a brilliant general trend. When a majority of the forces said no to the immortal court, it was actually the law that did not punish the majority. This was the true essence of change. Start from the interior realm, Start from the beginning. Every old guy had his own way. This was their understanding and speculation based on their own understanding of the Tao realm. They couldn't do it themselves, so they did it through remote control of Lu Xiaoyi. Firstly, it was to explore the great Tao, and secondly, it was for the old guys to compete with each other. Who asked this cigarette but to be so good-tempered, to be able to take a step forward after reaching the primordial soul stage, and be so easy to talk to? It was truly a rare breed that was even rarer than a phoenix. Therefore, everyone lined up and tried again and again according to their own ideas, which also involved the other 36 Khanate Great Daos. This was because their starting point could only be based on these 36 known Xiantian realms. However, some old fellows were worried that this cigarette but's Tao realm ability wasn't broad enough and couldn't fully unleash its imagination. But the results surprised them. Because there was no Tao realm that this little guy didn't understand. Although it might look a little rusty and not specialized enough, it was definitely a beginner. An old man had tortured him for more than a month, and after seeing the results, he would switch to another one. After a few years, he had almost gone through all 36 innate Daos, but this cigarette never uttered a word. Never once did he say that he did not know how to do it. Surprise turned into admiration. Sure enough, those who could take this step were no pushovers. Was it easier to master an innate Tao? Or would it be easier to get started in all 36? It was really hard to say. Everyone knew that it was wrong for a bear to break a stick. Even a foundation establishment cultivator understood the logic, so there was no reason that an essence soul cultivator wouldn't understand. He clearly knew, but he still did it. He wasn't afraid that his cultivation in this life would be wasted. He still persevered and worked on all 36 great Daos. He even had some success and obtained the recognition of the heavenly Tao. What did this mean? It was frightening to think about. This was a change in mentality. In the beginning, they felt that this person's mental state was weak and he didn't have his own ideas. Later on, they realized that this was a young man with a strong desire for knowledge. In the end, they understood the terrifying perseverance hidden under the young man's eternal smile, the heart of seeking the Tao, the fearlessness of not regretting even in death. Only now did they truly acknowledge him, and they each privately decided that they should let their juniors interact more with such a person. There was absolutely no harm. After digging a hole for a few years, the old fellows began to jump into it. This was absolutely an open scheme. It was based on one's own strength. The only thing that was hidden was the killing intent that was hidden deep in one's heart. It wasn't that no one had any suspicions, but no one cared about these things. A cultivator's performance could never be completely different. Just based on this little fellow's performance in the past few years, as seniors, they were willing to build a bridge for him. In any case, they had to find some passable and reliable companions for their juniors. This person had such ability, so why not? The tricks of these old fellows were actually of little use to the influence of the immortals. But Lu Xiaoyi deeply knew that you couldn't infer the process through the results. Even if it was useless, the process itself was very rare. It was a process of teaching from different Tao orthodoxies to different Tao realms. At his level, where else would he be able to find such an opportunity to receive guidance from others? Many of the methods were the experience of these old half-immortals for tens of thousands of years. It was priceless. Only he would be able to achieve an additional goal through such a strange method. This was a superb interpersonal skill, something that could be included in the innate Tao. Expose the omniscient 36 innate Tao. It would be exposed sooner or later, unless you never used it. If you never used it, what was the point of learning it? He needed to lay down a foundation for the future. Let the reputation of knowing all innate Tao be a label for him, temporarily using it as a trademark. This way, when he really did something in the future, it wouldn't be too abrupt. People would think that this guy seemed to know everything for a reason. After all, cultivation was unnecessary. Preparedness led to success, and unpreparedness led to failure. It was time to mentally prepare everyone for the possibility that he might be different in the future. A few years had passed, and there were already outstanding people among the 62 who were close to success. The path had been laid out, and it was still being refined. They were all experts and could see that the first person to move the immortals out of the revolving vortex was within a year. There were quite a few people fighting for it. A first Severance old cultivator stroked his long beard and suggested, "Since you know all 36 Tao, why don't you follow the order and rotate them? See what kind of changes will occur?" Though everyone didn't cheer in unison, they all nodded inwardly. It looked like there was a great possibility that this unwarranted path was a brand new great Tao that was produced when all 36 innate Tao were understood. Different paths led to the same goal. The views of the original two factions began to overlap, and everyone was looking forward to what would happen. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Actually, this method was the only one he could think of because he still couldn't show knowledge that far surpassed understanding of a certain Tao realm. Everyone thought that he only had a rough understanding. Though it was freakish, it was still within the acceptable range. If they knew that he was also proficient in a dozen or so Tao realms, then it wouldn't be admiration, but disaster. Chapter 17:27. If one did not take the path of specialization, one could only take the overall path. As for whether one could succeed or not, it did not matter. There should be no difference between the Khanate Great Taos, but in reality, how many Khanate Great Taos are above other Great Taos? Seniors, what can you teach me? No one could answer this question because this question could only be understood after one had merged with the Tao, and it had to be a Khanate Great Tao who had interacted with golden immortals. Lu Xiaoyi was not surprised and continued to ask, "Seniors, do you think it is possible to change the Khanate Great Taos by performing them one by one?" This junior has been enlightened, but there has to be a sequence. It can't be performed casually, right? Now, it seems that the only feasible way is to follow the timeline. Demonstrate according to the time of appearance of the Khanate Great Taos. I am not talented, and I am not sure about the order of appearance of the 36 Khanate Great Taos. Seniors, can you teach me? This question caused another argument among the old guys, because the argument about the time of appearance of the Khanate Great Taos had never stopped since the beginning of the cultivation world. Every orthodoxy had a different understanding of this. Of course, this difference was mostly the same in the order, but in the details, there were differences in the order of appearance of certain Great Taos. Among the 36 Great Taos, if there were different understandings of some of them, and they were arranged and combined, they could form countless schools of thought, and cultivators were known for their seriousness and stubbornness. The first 6 Great Taos were certain, Tai Yi, Tai Chu, Tai Shi, Tai Su, and Tai Chi. The cultivation world of the universe had no objection to this, but there was a big deviation as it went on. Was there time first, or the 5 elements first? If it was time, then space would appear. This was a sequence line. If it was the 5 elements, then yin and yang would be next, and this was another sequence line. Countless orthodoxies had disagreements here, but no exalted immortal had ever come down to clarify, and no one knew if it was because they disdained to do so, or did they not know. Next, the creation Great Tao was a very crucial Khanate Great Tao. Countless differences were once again united here, because humans began to appear only after the creation of the creation realm. However, right after that, there was another point of divergence in principles. After the creation, were the 5 fortunes the first to appear, or the 5 virtues first? If it was the 5 fates, then what followed would be karma and reincarnation. This was the Taoist view. If it was the 5 virtues, nirvana and nirvana should appear in the future. This was the path of Buddhism. 2 fundamental divergences, coupled with a few scattered Great Taos, such as thunder, strength, slaughter, origin, impermanence, and so on. Lu Xiaoyi's limited mathematical knowledge meant that there was no way he could come up with an effective arrangement. It was countless times more difficult than buying sports lottery tickets. 7 out of 36 in the sports lottery. This was a selection of 36, And there was even a requirement for the order. Even if some of the orders were actually fixed, such as the five ties, time and space, five elements, yin and yang, this was still an unsolvable problem. It was even more difficult than choosing between the chicken and the egg. It was easy to imagine how much these old fellows would argue. Other than getting started, he had done everything else. Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly. Amidst the commotion outside, he began his attempt. For someone like him who had studied the 36 Daos, he had his own views on the order of these Daos. The core idea was only one: impermanence. In other words, he didn't think there was only one correct answer. Since he had grasped the main point, it would be fine as long as he could justify everything else. Why should he be so calculative? Thus, the universe evolved in the immortals. From Tai, Qi was not seen in the boundless void. From Taichu, Qi was seen in the innate Qi of Taichu. From Taichu to Taichu's original state of being tangible but not tangible. Finally, the beginning of Taisu's substance appeared. Form but substance, but not a body. Such a change, in the eyes of mortals or cultivators with insufficient realm, would be no change in the entire immortals. However, in the eyes of these half-immortals, the inner core of the immortals had a slight change. If there was a change, it meant that the path was right. If there was a slight change, it meant that this person's Tao realm was not enough. Thus, there was chaos, a misty state where Qi, form, and substance were one and not separated. It was said that all things fell into each other, but did not separate. Those who fell into each other could not be seen, heard, or followed. Thus it was called E. E was formless, and E was one. One change was 7, and 7 changes were 9. 9 changes, in the end, were repeated changes into one. First, the beginning of the transformation of form. Light was the sky above, turbidity was the earth below, and harmony was the human. Thus, heaven and earth contained essence, and all things were born. It was Tai Chi. Up until now, everything was as expected, because any cultivator, as long as they reached a certain realm and understood these great Daos, would evolve like this. It was a fixed routine, an unchanging starting position, and following that was the real thing, the place where the orthodoxy leaned. Was it time? Or the 5 elements? This was what the old guys were very concerned about. It was also a very principled thing. But in his senses, this little fellow seemed to have paused for a moment here. Was he hesitating? Or, the most taboo in the evolution of the great Tao was to pause. Originally, the Tao realm was not enough, and the Tao opportunity was fleeting. If you stopped, all your previous efforts would be in vain, and you would have to start all over again. However, in the obvious pause here, the evolution of the great Tao did not stop. Time. Lu Xiaoyi chose time next. It seemed that he was more inclined to the space-time theory. A half-immortal immediately reacted. No, there was something fishy about the pause just now. There seemed to be a pause, but there didn't seem to be. There seemed to be a Tao realm, but there might not be. It was groundless. He inserted the groundless here. What is his intention? The evolution of the great Tao did not stop. It seems like the heavenly Tao has accepted his choice. Another half-immortal clapped his hand. Wonderful. This little guy is really creative. Putting the groundless here can be treated as a variable. Could be time. Could be the 5 elements. With such a variable, the whole game is alive. After time and space, the 5 elements and yin and yang were born. This was also a fixed routine, the cornerstone of the universe. With these 4 great Daos, the entire universe became lively. Creation. This great Tao opened up another window. The appearance of stars, all living things, and so on made the universe become colorful. Then there was another pause. The half-immortals knew that this little guy had put his groundless here again to show that he was not sure about the following changes, and to allow other choices to appear. This was the application of the groundless in the universe's changes. Maybe there wasn't. Maybe it was right. Maybe it was wrong. It's actually this kind of application. A half-immortal muttered. It seems that the groundless will always be the groundless. It will never appear as a true great Tao, but as an existence of a variable. It is responsible for coordinating the entire great Tao system. Is it the escaped one? This conforms to the concept of Taoism, but the problem is if a cultivator fuses with it, wouldn't he become the escaped one? Everyone, what kind of Tao realm is the escaped one? Is it the supreme or the supreme? Is it dispensable or is it the escaped one? Chapter 1728. Everyone looked at each other. They really couldn't figure out what would happen in the end. The escape path. It might be the most useless path, but it might also be the most crucial one. It existed in theory and was easy for everyone to understand. But if it was applied to a real person, it was a bit unimaginable. This seemingly well-behaved primary school student always listened to the guidance of the seniors with a smile. When he really let go, the path he walked was not something that everyone here could imagine or dare to walk. Just based on this point, he was not a primary school student. He was a pioneer, He was a true Tao seeker who didn't care about personal life and death. It was funny that they used to point at him. Actually, what qualifications did they have? At this realm, and people who loved ancient methods, they respected this kind of person who dared to be the first in the world. Because in the ancient times, the ancestors of mankind used this kind of cultivation mentality to create the brilliant cultivation civilization. Whether it was successful or not, daring to walk this path showed great perseverance, big heart, and fearlessness. Up until now, Lu Xiaoyi had already achieved his goal. Almost every old cultivator was thinking about how to get acquainted with such a person and introduce him to their juniors. In this chaotic world where the epoch was changing, this might be a great opportunity. There were many ways to convince people. Using one's mouth was one level, and using one's hands was another. But in a place like the interior heaven, could one use one's mouth to persuade a person's thousands of years of philosophy? Could one break a person's spine that had been straight for thousands of years? Lu Xiaoyi used the most special method to achieve this. In a few years, he had imperceptibly influenced them, and he didn't even ask for anything. After the creation, it was again unexpected that he didn't evolve the 5 luck and 5 virtues. Instead, there were 3 scattered paths: thunder, impermanence, and reincarnation. He's from the nature sect. Nature first, then cultivation. A half-immortal nodded. In cultivation, there was the nature sect and the consciousness sect. Generally speaking, Taoists respected the nature sect more, while Buddhists leaned towards the consciousness sect. Of course, it wasn't absolute. But now, Lu Xiaoyi's choice clearly showed his inclination, and it made most of the Taoists feel sad. Then, the 5 luck and 5 virtues intertwined and connected naturally in one go. It wasn't difficult to learn the concepts of the Great Tao. What was difficult was learning the first 36 concepts. It wasn't that no one had done it before, but to be able to string them together seamlessly, this required a lot of skill. He needed to look at them from a higher position. Could this be the true mystery of Su Su? At this point, 24 innate Taos had appeared in the entire evolution, and the evolution was still continuing. This meant that the heavenly Tao approved of this order. Just this alone was something that none of the dozens of half-immortals and young gods present could do. Even if they were to copy this little guy's order, they wouldn't be able to do it, because no one understood the 36, especially the groundless one. After the 5 fortunes and 5 virtues, the pause appeared for the 3rd time. However, the half-immortals knew that this might be the last time that such a thing would happen. After all, in the world of cultivation, the number 3 was very mysterious. The remaining 12 great Taos could only be completed in one go. As expected, Lu Xiaoyi's next actions were without hesitation. They were as smooth as flowing water, as if he didn't need to think. Karma, nirvana, power, life and death, void, slaughter, destruction, nirvana, the torrent flowed down. It felt as if he didn't have any choice among them. It was as if he did it again, it would be another order. Finally, origin, nothingness, and return to one. The overall simulation of the 36 great Daos was completed in one go. It was like a hot knife through butter to his heart's content. Was this luck or coincidence? No one would think so. Everyone knew that this was inevitable. The role of Su Su was finally displayed in the eyes of the world for the first time. It wasn't a new Tao realm, but a variable that connected the entire innate great Tao system. Just as the return to one was completed, the huge immortal world lightly struggled forward and then broke free from the shackles of the revolving vortex. It began to slowly float into the distance, never to look back. Lu Xiaoyi stood at the top of Mount Laojun and bowed deeply to the dozens of half-immortals and young gods in the sky. It's all thanks to the generosity of all the seniors that I have today. I was originally at a loss of what to do, but I didn't expect that there would be such a good fortune. Everyone has their own ideas, and I think this is also the charm of the ancient method. Whatever enlightenment I have, I thank all the teachers. The dozens of old cultivators returned the salute. Lu Xiaoyi had benefited, but how could they not? It was equivalent to the old pedants making a major breakthrough in an academic field. Although it wasn't their own research, it was also of great benefit to their own cultivation. They could draw inferences about other things from one example. The great Daos were interconnected, so how could there be so many boundaries? The application of variables was their most practical experience. It was so in the innate great Tao system, but in fact, wasn't it the same in their own research direction? Let's see if they could find the escaped one that belonged to them. At this moment, among the 34 old cultivators present, he received 27 invitations, inviting him to come when it was convenient. Well, this was no longer an invitation from a teacher to a student, but an invitation from a fellow cultivator. It was respect and admiration. In the interior heaven of the ancient method, this was the correct way to open it, instead of swinging a sword and fighting. In a dense cloud high in the sky, 3 cultivators silently watched what was happening below. As the highest level of the interior food chain, their views were naturally different. Swordsman. Guchan frowned. Swordsman. Yangon sighed. Wu Ma smiled. Hooligans are not scary. I'm only afraid of hooligans with culture. However, he also has a bit of luck. It just so happens that in a place like Mount Laojun, the luck of his great ancestor is always on his side. It doesn't necessarily mean that he has real ability. We still need to see how long he can endure before he reveals his swordsman nature. Yangon felt very regretful. This should be the work of our generation's orthodox Taoism. I didn't expect that would be revealed in the hands of a boorish swordsman. But in any case, it belongs to my Taoism, even if it's a branch. I can't understand the general trend of the universe more and more. Guchan chanted the name of Buddha, 5 virtues, nirvana, impermanence. Especially in merit and impermanence, this child has a deep understanding. It seems that he doesn't care about the difference between Taoism and Buddhism in the choice of great Tao. Yes, this child has fate with Buddhism. Wu Ma was disdainful. Are the two of you tired? No matter what, the two of you will end up in the struggle between Taoism and Buddhism. Is there a need for this? In my opinion, this child is most concerned about nature. The derivation of great Tao is also freewheeling and not rigid. Yes, it's a bit like me, a freelancer, free and unfettered world. Chapter 1729. Lu Xiaoyi's Mount Laojun Immortals was the first to jump out of the whirlpool. This was an invisible pressure to the other 61 evildoers. Everyone knew that victory or defeat would be decided within a year or even less. There was no more time. Hence, they began to exert their strength. Half a month later, Eastern Sky's Nirvana Prince Xingjuansung was the first to break through and moved his immortals out of the whirlpool. 3 days later, Western Sky's Destruction Prince Duan Li succeeded. It was as if there was a hole in the dam, and the latecomers came one after another. Northern Sky's Rooster King Sangung, Southern Sky's Wanjun Prince Hong Tiangang, Western Skies Shengdesun Shi Yi, Northern skies intercepting Luck Prince Hua, Hu. Eastern skies Enyang Prince Ma Bailu. Eastern skies Bumei Prince Jin Yao. Eastern skies Dendrobium Prince Ilian. On the whole, the eastern heaven had more cultivators than the other three heavens. Even the white tiger of the western heaven was slightly inferior. The southern heaven and the northern heaven were even worse. This was also in line with the actual situation. After all, the eastern heaven was controlled by the orthodox Taoists. Within half a year, 12 people were ranked. Unfortunately, Qing Xian was stuck at 7th place and only had a fragment. He did not get the opportunity to observe the Immortals announcement. However, the competition was not over yet. There was still a portion of people who did not make it to the moving Immortals. Even if they had lost the prize, none of them gave up. This was their belief. People like them would not give up so easily. It was also a kind of attitude. Without such a state of mind, they would not have been able to reach this stage. No one would laugh at them. Such a shallow matter did not belong to cultivators of this level. Today's ranking only represented today's ability. It did not represent the future. There were plenty of examples in the world of cultivation, so it wasn't rare. Everyone was still in their respective celestial mountains, silently comprehending what they had learned, reflecting on themselves, and learning from others. Although they were young, this heart of Tao, supreme perseverance, top-notch talent, and a trace of fate had led to their current achievements. Here, there was no foppish playboy, no coincidence. A year later, all 62 immortals were moved out of the whirlpool. Such a seemingly impossible movement did not hinder any of the young evildoers. This showed how abnormal the talent and potential of this group of people were. They were the real seed players of the universe. How could they just make up the numbers? The cloud board made another noise. Yangon, 3 people's figures reappeared. They were still in the Flying Cross ravine, everybody reunited at the same ravine. The old Taoist priest Yangon looked around and said, "This competition is uncertain about the future and the past. It's just a small application of your own Tao realm. If you value it, it's because you have the heart to improve. If you don't care, it's because you have the intention to leave the mortal world. That's about it. But there was one thing. Regardless of success or failure, regardless of ranking, relying on one's own strength was the right way to go. Today, there was someone who did not hesitate to borrow the strength of others to achieve his goal. Even if he won the Tao crown, what was the point? Therefore, I deposed him and took him as the righteous law. The sea of Tao is boundless, and there will be no next time. He didn't mention the name because he wanted to leave some face for a certain someone. Because a certain someone moved the fastest, it was true that most people didn't know who it was. Who dared to play tricks in public? However, a certain someone didn't care at all. As if he had been praised for winning the championship, he stood up complacently, bowed, and said modestly, "I'm ashamed." He was used to cheating when he was young. When it came to an occasion, he couldn't help himself. The itch in his heart was hard to scratch. I've caused trouble for everyone. Looking at his appearance, he didn't seem to have any intention of repentance. The so-called cheating habit when he was young was just a joke to everyone. Only one of them knew that this was the truth. When he was young, he stole scrolls. When he was old, he stole from the heavens. There was nothing he didn't dare to do. However, there were also people who didn't approve of it. For example, the second brother, marching army monk. Umipa, Senior, you're wrong. To be able to steal is also a skill. Cultivators of our generation, which one of us isn't stealing from the heavens? I'm not as skilled as others, so I have nothing to say. Even if I'm second, I don't dare to be first. There were many people who agreed. They were all extremely confident, true cultivators who didn't want to profit for nothing. However, Lu Xiaoyi was very clear that marching army monk was using this opportunity to reduce his influence. He was also raising his own demeanor of not caring about fame and fortune. The matter was obvious. If he was really deposed, what would everyone think? Most people would feel that it was a pity. Being able to borrow others' strength was also a kind of ability. In the end, he didn't get anything. Instead, they would feel sympathy and goodwill. If he wasn't deposed and took the first place, what would others think? They would definitely think that this person's position was not legitimate. They would despise him and reject him. A simple sentence could not only show one's noble character and unquestionable integrity, but also destroy the opponent's plan of pretending to be pitiful. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. This required a deep understanding of people's hearts. However, this monk did it so easily. There was no trace of anger. It seemed that this person had already seen through Lu Xiaoyi's identity. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done this. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. I don't dare to disobey the orders of my superiors. I can't be clear of my own turbidity. I'm ashamed to receive it, but I'm rebellious to accept it. Marching army monk insisted, how can you do to others what you don't want to be done to yourself? Fellow Taoist, you're not ashamed, but all of us are. We don't dare to accept your resignation. With the two of them rejecting, the atmosphere became a little awkward. The three mighty people didn't expect these demons to have such strong self-esteem. It made their decision a little petty. Qing Xian cursed in his heart. With this thing around, nothing could be done smoothly. It wouldn't be over if there weren't some demons. He still had to clean up the mess. After so many years, he was used to it. However, how to help was a trick. You can't just stand on that guy's side and wave the flag. That's the stupidest way and not Qing Xian style. He had to find another way. In this negotiation, he was actually a person who benefited from it. From seventh brother to sixth brother, he could not only get the fragment but also the position. Therefore, he had a certain right to speak. Bowing is the right thing to do. Don't take from your neighbors. All Taoism is the right thing to do. Like seeing flowers bloom, like seeing the new year. True and not snatching, the strong are easy to be poor. Secluded people empty mountains, plucking apples when crossing the water. Thin words of love, unhurried heavens. Master, you're right. There's no point in rejecting this opportunity. As cultivators, we should be straightforward and courageous. What's the point of charity? How about this, since everyone doesn't want to get glory that doesn't belong to them, why don't we give these opportunities to those who are interested? What he meant was that those who were ranked at the top should carry on their style and give up everything. They should give these opportunities to those who came later, those who had strong demands in this aspect. First, they agreed with marching army monk and then took drastic measures. Everyone gave up on these opportunities. The result might not be able to completely turn the situation around, but at least it would be a tie. If they wanted to be noble, then everyone should be noble together. If someone was unhappy and blamed, they wouldn't just blame Lu Xiaoyi for cheating. They would also blame marching army monk for his superfluous act of pretending to be noble and virtuous. It was indeed the style of the three pure ones, borrowing strength to fight strength and diverting the trouble. It was a game of perfection. Chapter 17:30. The marching monks smiled in greeting, as if thanking this person for speaking up for justice, but his heart was clear. He naturally knew this person. Well, Mabailu. It was all a smokescreen. In fact, he also had a Taoist name, Qing Xian. The three pure ones' ox nose had a much bigger reputation. He and that Lu Xiaoyi wore the same pair of pants. The two of them were acting out a double act here. They were two bad seeds. One was openly pulling in people, and the other was secretly adding fuel to the fire. The people who could help him weren't many. They were basically limited to Buddhists, and not all of them. That was because in this realm, everyone had their own views on how to get along with Buddhism, and they weren't necessarily as radical as them. Duanli opened his mouth. He had to open his mouth. The first 12 had to open their mouths. No one could make a decision for them. Even if the other 11 people gave up, he still had the right to insist on his own interests. This was what a cultivator relied on their own ability to obtain. It was what they fought for, so why did they have to give it up? Of course, if they persisted, it might give people the impression that they weren't magnanimous, and they might lose some connections. It all depended on how the cultivator looked at this problem. It doesn't matter if I'm ranked second or third. What belongs to me should belong to me. Even if I don't use it and give it to others, that's another matter. He could see that the three Eastern Sky cultivators were opposing each other here. You guys were like dogs biting dogs. Why should others follow along and give up what they work hard for? Northern Skies, Singung, and Hua, who both chose not to give up their share. They also disdained to explain anything and only respected their own efforts. On the contrary, the Western Skies, Shui, and the Southern Skies, Hong Tiangang, chose to give up. No one had asked them to do so, but they were confident in their own strength. If there was no such reward, whatever they wanted, they would naturally take it back. These 5 people didn't join the Eastern Skies' 3 people. Their choice was also based on their own intentions. Starting from their own point of view, they would do what they thought was right. They wouldn't be confused by power disputes. This was a cultivator's natural quality. But from this, it could also be seen that if they wanted to use these people for their own purposes, it was basically impossible. Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xin's divine senses collided. In this matter, they had already grasped this group of people's code of conduct. They discovered that they weren't easy to fool. This was true for them, and it was true for the marching monks as well. Every one of them had a definite idea, and it was not something that could be solved by friendship, hot-bloodedness, or deceit. A good spiritual conference had a strong start and a weak finish. In the end, only Duan Li, Sangung, Hua Hu, and the others had a chance. It could be imagined that their so-called unwillingness to give up was just a gesture. When the time came for the rewards to be given out, the 3 of them would definitely not accept the rewards. The core of their attitude was, "What belongs to me, no one can take it away from me, unless I don't want it." By the same logic, none of the cultivators ranked after the 12th place would be so shameless as to ask for something that didn't belong to them. If they didn't obtain it with their own ability, they would rather not have it. It was hard to say if everyone present could do this when there was no one around, but in such a public place, there could only be one result. He had taken a step forward at such a young age. He was proud, reserved, and cherished his reputation. This was a matter of principle. On the surface, the 3 mighty figures were shaking their heads and sighing, but the conversation between them was completely different. Yangon complained, "What are these people doing? You can't even keep an eye on a few fragments? And let them escape? You're making us sit here like candles. I've cultivated for over 10,000 years, and I actually have to rely on this kind of little trick to take advantage of the younger generation's things. How embarrassing." Guchan humphed. "What do you mean you can't keep an eye on them? It's just that you can't bear to give them away. That's why you found such a lame excuse. Do you think others are stupid with this little thought? In the end, they're just watching the show from behind, pushing us to the front like we're sitting on pins and needles." Wu Ma sighed. Fortunately, that cigarette butt's behavior was a little unrestrained. If everyone followed the rules, I'd like to see how your Buddhist lineage would be able to put your face. What they said actually had other secrets. In terms of how to treat these young freaks, the 1,000-odd people of the interior heaven actually had their own standpoints. They weren't completely united, and there was no so-called leadership core. It was an extremely loose structure, and the cornerstone of the core was the 100-odd second severance mighty figures. Among them, there were also all kinds of scheming against each other and undermining each other. This was the reality of Taoism and Buddhism opposing each other, mixed with some strange creatures. Taoism had its own internal factions, and Buddhism also had their own standpoints. On the whole, nurturing these young people was the general trend, but there was also a very important voice, self-reliance, and self-improvement. In other words, they didn't agree with this kind of cramming support that gave benefits, and letting them run on their own should be the best help. In the end, it was Yangon's faction that gained the upper hand, and that was why this assembly was carried out. At the same time, the 12 shards were also provided by each person. This was an agreement reached, who knew that the assembly had already started and the promises had been made, but there were dissidents who played dirty tricks. Using some unknown method, they opened a hole in the space where the interior heaven stored the shards. When they received this news, the competition of the assembly was already nearing its end. They had boasted, but couldn't give out the reward, so this was a great loss of face. With no other choice, the matter was urgent, and there was no time to find a way to remedy the situation. Thus, Yangon had no choice but to use this plan, and use Lu Xiaoyi's so-called cheating to provoke the arrogance of all the young freaks. The rules were very vague. It didn't say that they could seek outside help, nor did it say that they couldn't. This was the characteristic of how cultivators spoke and acted. If they didn't say anything, they wouldn't be able to understand. Why? It was so that they could settle the score after the event and patch it up. This was a good habit. As a matter of fact, this disgraceful assembly had failed, and the scene had undergone a very strange change after they decided to punish the cheater. It had to be said that when it came to cunning, the young foxes were still not as good as the old foxes. Of course, these people really didn't take such a reward seriously, and this was also the truth. Pride could also be used. The three old men who had lived for 50,000 years understood this too well. This time, they had finally covered up their embarrassment, but there was no such thing as an airtight wall in the cultivation world. With the passage of time, the various things that happened at the assembly couldn't escape the investigation of those who were observant. After all, who could come here without the 7 orifices heart? The three mighty figures decided to make up for it. Originally, according to the original plan, this assembly would be simple. It would officially end after the shard rewards were given out, and the remaining problems would be left to these restless young people to deal with themselves. Anyway, they knew each other, so how could they fight each other? You couldn't tie them up forever. However, in terms of the rewards, the organizers had played a trick. In fact, the best way to cover it up was to use a more attractive event to dispel all the previous doubts. This was called shifting the focus of attention. They were all old freaks, so doing it was effortless and easy. Chapter 17:31. Yangon shook the cloudboard and attracted everyone's attention. Flying Crossing Stream is not an ordinary place in the interior heaven. Since the day the interior heaven was formed, this stream has never been out of the revolving vortex. Other immortals have come and gone, but the Flying Crossing Stream has always been rooted here. Therefore, the relationship between the revolving vortex and the Flying Crossing Stream is very intriguing. The first owner of this stream was Celestial Lord Verpka. Before he became an immortal, he had another name in the cultivation world, Eye Demon. Most of his supernatural powers were focused on his eyes. Therefore, after he became an immortal, he was given the title of Celestial Lord Verpka. He was considered a figure below the golden immortal of the immortal court. The focus was on his mountain of fame. Perhaps you have seen it from the sky. Does it look like an eyeball? The two mountains are the scare of the eye, and the deep stream is the slit of the pupil when you squint. Everyone had their own thoughts. That was indeed the case, but no one thought in this direction. Who could have such a big eyeball? Only someone was secretly sweating. Looking down from the sky, the Flying Crossing Stream was like a person's eyeball, and the ravine was the pupil. But he could see that it was a big hole. The ravine was the unspeakable place. Why was there such a big difference between people? Was it really like what Qing Xian said? Was it related to the quality of person? However, he quickly comforted himself. They were all parts of a person's body. How could there be a difference in value? If there was a difference in importance, a person would not die without an eyeball. Why don't you try if you lost an eye? In the millions of years of the interior heaven's history, there were countless capable people. Some people figured out some special things here. If he could successfully mobilize the inner power of this place, the Flying Crossing Stream would really be like a human eye. It would become a huge treasure that transcended the visual range. The divine light it emitted would be able to break through illusions and penetrate everything. It would be able to see through distance as nothing. In other words, we can even see the specific situation of every cultivation world in the main world. That includes your home planets. Everyone's interest was piqued. This function was simply too powerful. It could almost be compared to a beautiful celestial item, just like the radio telescope in Lu Xiaoyi's previous life. Who knew if there was a time difference? However, not everyone has the ability to open the eye of heaven's eye. This required the support of a strong spiritual power. It required profound Tao-level power as the foundation. Ever since the creation of the interior heaven, not even a second severance great cultivator had been able to use the heaven's eye alone. It required the cooperation of at least 2 people. Of course, in your current situation, you will need more people to cooperate. Yangon was satisfied to see that everyone's interest had been aroused. They had temporarily forgotten the embarrassment of not being able to fulfill the reward in the previous round, so they continued to work hard. In the previous match, you were competing in individual strength. This time, we will compete in the coordination of cultivators in a team. With the 4 symbols heavens as the grouping, the 4 teams would search for the unique celestial phenomena in their respective symbols heavens. The team with the most celestial phenomena and the most stable formation would win. I won't mention the reward because it's an insult to all of you. Controlling the eye of the heaven's eyes itself is the greatest reward. You should know that in the interior realm, the Cultivators Convention forbids cultivators from using the eye of the heaven's eyes to spy on others' privacy. This time, I made an exception for you. You should cherish it. It sounded very attractive, but these young monsters were not so easily fooled. Why do we have to artificially draw a circle? Why do we have to oppose the 4 symbols heavens? Can't we form groups freely? Can't we form groups with Tao orthodoxies? Can't we do it on our own accord? A monster asked loudly and received a unanimous response from everyone. To them, the fate that they were most unwilling to be arranged by others was their companions who were arranged by others. Therefore, it was almost a common wish. Even if they were in the same symbol heavens, they might not be friends. They might also be mortal enemies. For example, Lu Xiaoyi, Qing Xian, and Xing Junsung. Since Yangon had spoken, of course, he had a card up his sleeve. Although the eye of the heavens' eyes is magical, it also has limitations. Under the heavenly axiom, the most taboo is omnipotence. Even a Daluo golden immortal might not be able to know everything in the universe with just a glance, let alone us half-immortals. It's just borrowing the remaining grace of celestial Verpka to have the endless vision to a certain extent. Since there are limitations, the biggest limitation of the eye of the heaven's eyes is that it can only see one symbol heavens at a time. If it sees the east sky, it won't be able to see the west sky. If it sees the south sky, it won't be able to see the north sky. With this limitation, we can only form groups according to the symbol heavens. Although you have extraordinary achievements, limited by your age, how many of you dare to say that you understand the environment and star maps of other symbols heavens? Everyone was speechless. Yangon was speaking the truth. Most of their activities were around their own mother planets. In view of their young lifespans, the furthest they could go was a few hundred years. If they couldn't even go out of their own symbol heavens, how could they understand the general situation of other symbols heavens? In that case, it was most realistic and reliable to find targets in the symbol heavens where their mother planets were located. Yangon chuckled. Too many groups? It's a mess. 10 people in a group for groups in total. For your current situation, it's good enough. Therefore, I said that we'll form groups according to the symbol heavens. Do you have any objections? All the monsters expressed their agreement. To them, the process of this competition was actually more exciting than the previous one. The observation position could be fought for, the fragments could be fought for, but to see their mother planets that they hadn't seen for hundreds of years was almost everyone's wish. Lu Xiaoyi was the last to enter the interior sky. He had stayed here for dozens of years. Those who came early had been here for hundreds of years and were still full of feelings for the mother planets that were born and raised. They could go out, but that was only in theory. There were still some specific links that had not been resolved. Therefore, after hundreds of years, everyone had the desire to see their mother planets again. Everyone had the same thought. There were no exceptions. Cultivators should forget their emotions, but that was only after ascending to immortality. Before ascending to immortality, one was a mortal, just a cultivator among mortals. Since they were mortals, they had all kinds of mortal feelings. One of the deepest feelings was the longing for their mother planets. Therefore, no one objected. Even if there were people in the symbol heavens that they hated, they could only hold their noses and cooperate. The current environment was not right. It was not the time to settle scores. Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian's divine senses touched, and the two immediately came to a consensus. Qing Xian, you know the location of the Hengi realm, right? Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. Don't worry, I'm very concerned about it. In order to locate it, I've looked for countless reference objects. In the main world, other than the 5 rings of blue sky, I'm most familiar with its location. I'm even more familiar with it than Zhou Xian. Qing Xian was full of evil intentions. Although their orthodoxy is very low-key, it's incompatible with mainstream Taoism and Buddhism. Many things will be seen as alien. Let's not say anything, just quietly move the heavenly eye over and see what everyone thinks of it. It's much more direct than us wasting our breath. Chapter 1732. In the world of cultivation, they were still fighting for Tao orthodoxy. There were big and small conflicts between Tao orthodoxies. The big ones were like Buddhism and Taoism. If one looked at it carefully, there were differences in the entire system. Hence, they could not see eye to eye with each other and thought that they were the true orthodoxy. However, both sides were huge and could not bear the consequences of fighting as a whole. They could only endure it. There were also some Tao orthodoxies that could produce an ancestor. For example, there are all kinds of strange branches under Taoism. They were considered to be one family millions of years ago. Hence, there was room for reconciliation. This was a conflict between small Tao orthodoxies. In short, they were not considered to be out of the circle. However, Hengi River orthodoxy was a very special existence. They had nothing to do with Taoism and gradually drifted away from Buddhism. In the end, they formed such a nondescript thing. Because they kept a low profile, they were not widely known. If it was a peaceful era, they might have continued like this, and no one would care about them. After all, their things could not be spread outside of the Hung River. Because it was less harmful, it was not easy to spread. In the world of cultivation in the universe, they would turn a blind eye to such a non-threatening Tao orthodoxy. However, they should not be thinking of fishing in troubled waters and trying to change something before the universe changed. This was also something that Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian did not understand. If they wanted to pull someone from the heaven of interior to Hengi boundary to cause trouble, persuasion, enticement, threats, and deception would not work. It would be a bad thing. Only by letting everyone see the true appearance of Hengi boundary could these evildoers be a thorn in their hearts. At the very least, they would know what kind of opponent they were dealing with. Whether it was worth it, whether it went against their own Tao heart, and how much karma could they get. If they felt that they were helping Taoism to eradicate heresy, then there would be a common basis for this matter. Only then would they be able to get a lesser half immortal to help. This was very important in the cultivation world. You couldn't let others help you, only to end up losing something that they insisted on. He was running for Xian Yuan, for the sword vein. Qing Xian was running for the 3 pure ones, for the orthodox Taoism. In fact, every evildoer who came here was the same. They were not only doing it for themselves, but also for the orthodoxy behind them. A lone tree cannot make a forest. No matter how strong you are, you must have your own roots. On the other hand, if you didn't have any roots, you wouldn't be that strong either. You would just be a pawn abandoned by the upper echelons because there was no one behind you. Who else would they abandon if not you? How could he run? It was not just a simple fight in the cultivation world of the universe. You had to contribute to the great changes of the universe for the mainstream to acknowledge you and the heavenly axiom to favor you. Only then would you be able to get a share of the pie after the change of the next epoch. What was contribution? Eliminating dissidents was the greatest contribution. There weren't many opportunities like this. If you went to destroy a Taoist or Buddhist sect, you would at most be given an inner scroll. You wouldn't get any points for gaining the upper hand. But if it was a place like the Hengi realm, it was equivalent to making a contribution to the development of Taoism or Buddhism. You'll have a reason to stay in the mainstream and enjoy the most direct benefits. When everyone wanted to do it, but you didn't, you would automatically be excluded from a circle. Then, you would gradually drift away and realize that the mainstream didn't want you to play anymore. This was the evil intention of the fifth ring duo. He had placed the Hung River realm in front of all the monsters. He didn't say anything and didn't do anything. These extremely sharp fellows would naturally discover a certain enticement that would move their hearts. Then, they would quietly hide this secret in their hearts. Because the Hung River realm was too big and their sect was too far away. When one day, there would be a rumor that one or a few realms' powers were going to destroy this heretic, what would these monsters think? They would definitely take advantage of the situation and hit someone when they were down, for themselves and for the orthodoxies behind them. This was the greatest truth of cultivation. When that time came, none of the young monsters here would stay out of it. Even if it wasn't for themselves, they would have to think for their sect. Even a marching monk. This leader of the Eastern Sky main world's Buddhist forces was no exception. Although they were secretly colluding with the Hung River realm, that was in a situation where no one knew and no one had evidence. Once the Hung River realm was exposed, the general situation would be set. The marching monk would definitely be at the forefront. He would have the motive to silence them. He would have a reason to consign the Hung River realm to eternal damnation. When their original collaborators turned hostile, they were the ones who were the most ruthless ones. If they could finally force the marching monk to have no choice but to betray and kill their allies, this would be the highest realm of the five-ring duo's plan. They didn't even need to consider the problem of leaking the secret. The interior realm activity that seemed completely unrelated to the main world was instantly found the best entry point by these two guys with ulterior motives. In a few words, the general strategy was decided. It had to be said that the two of them could mix together and act in collusion with each other. They were truly a perfect match. The remaining problem was how to specifically implement it. This belonged to the technical category. The difficulty wasn't small either, because among the Eastern Sky's 16 people, the Nirvana Prince, the Marching Monk, the Bright Dendrobium Prince, Ilian, and the Yongdingsbuing Prince, Jin Yao, were also enemies. Moreover, they were all ranked near the top, which showed that their strength was also very strong. What the F***K? Among the 16 people, I actually know that all of them are enemies. Needless to say, our details have already been leaked. That bald donkey definitely won't keep it a secret for us. Malu, how did you mix in? How did you mix in like this? It's a bit like everyone is shouting to beat you up. If they join hands, I'm afraid we won't be able to do as we wish. Qing Xian snorted. You're asking me? I'm the one who wants to ask you. Ever since I met you, I have fewer and fewer friends and more enemies. I can't even hide from the interior realm. After using his luck, things still had to be done. Although they are all our enemies, they might not be able to truly join hands. People of light look down on anyone and won't submit to anyone. Yang Dingren has his own plans, and it's not that simple. Among the other people in the Eastern Sky, there's one who came from the outer domain's 3 pure ones. He's from the same sect as my 5 rings' 3 pure ones. I'm sure I can pull him over. There are also 3 who are Orthodox Taoists. There's also hope. At the very least, they won't be hostile to us. Take a look at the rest. How many can you handle? Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. I can handle them with a sword. If I don't use a sword, I can't handle any of them. Qing Xian said hatefully. Haven't you always boasted of being distinguished and elegant, free and unrestrained? There are 2 Kuin cultivators here. Why don't I hand them over to you? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. I'm actually the best at spending money and enjoying life. These 2 don't seem to be lacking in money. Qing Xian said unyieldingly. I don't care. I'm responsible for 4. Isn't it too much to give you half the responsibility for 2? I can't do all the dirty work, and you're only responsible for showing off? I'll also find someone to temporarily confuse the heavenly secrets and make them have a temporary blur in their judgment. However, this won't last long. I won't care who you find, but at the very least, you have to pull 2 to maintain neutrality. We have 4 monks in the eastern sky and a blind bird. That's already 6 people. If you pull a little bit of connections, we won't be able to hold them off. When the time comes, we won't be able to make decisions wherever the eye of heaven sees. All plans are just empty talk. Chapter 1733. Lu Xiaoyi was very worried. Rangoon's words were still ringing in his ears, but it also gave these evildoers a certain amount of time to communicate with each other. Because this was a game that paid particular attention to mutual cooperation. The most taboo thing was to tear down each other's stage and secretly trip each other up. You could not put the difference between the 4 symbols in your heart, because the majority of people present would think this way. Even if it was in different symbols, the same orthodoxy would make people feel closer. But you could think about it, but you couldn't do it. Right now, the whole situation was that they were passively divided into 4 parts. So at the very least, they had to use the image of the 4 symbols to show people. The other symbols could sincerely cooperate, but only you couldn't. What did this mean? It meant that the inner volume was serious. It meant that the eastern sky cultivators did not care about the overall situation. It meant that you were selfish and couldn't even do the most basic sense of propriety as a cultivator. The cultivation world placed great importance on individual ability, and similarly placed great importance on coordination and cooperation. Even if you were uncomfortable in your heart, you still couldn't show it. You had to have the quality to cooperate for some benefit in a short period of time. This was the rhythm of doing big things. How could he quietly complete his plan in opposition to the Buddhist lineage? Was it to rope in more people to confront them? He didn't think this was the best method. The key was that time was too tight, and it didn't give him much room to maneuver. Even if he was willing to sacrifice himself for this, whether or not they would take a liking to him was also a problem. Here were all evildoers, each and every one of them young and promising, confident and distinguished. He really was very ordinary among them. Originally, he was a flower that couldn't die, and finding a few green leaves could still set it off. But if you had to drill into the peony, rose, or lily, you yourself would become a green leaf. Qin Shin's idea was simply unreliable. He had his own way of doing things. The marching monk looked at the swordsman with a smile on his face. As if seeing an old friend, he walked over with a smile on his face. Other people's smiles paid attention to affinity and infectious power. When their 2 smiles collided, it was like countless small knives colliding with each other. Flying across the stream, the white clouds high, thousands upon thousands of hanging silk ribbons. I wonder who cut the catkins? The interior spring breeze was like scissors. Grandson, let's change places and I'll kill you. Lu Xiaoyi's smile was even more gentle. Oh, you can't bear it? You've revealed your true colors? You're not pretending to be elegant and graceful? It doesn't matter. This little monk will play with you any time and place. Even if you are an immortal sword, believe it or not, I can still refine you into slag. The marching monk was not courteous at all, but his tone had nothing to do with his gentle demeanor. You can't be polite when dealing with this kind of boorish person. Otherwise, this guy will take advantage of you and say all sorts of nasty things. Why should you be humiliated by his words? But what he didn't expect was that this guy really didn't care about the occasion. Clang! Lu Xiaoyi gripped the long sword in his hand and laughed with a twisted face. Don't choose, I can't wait. Now is the time. Right now. As long as one of us is down, everyone will be at ease. Eastern Sky 16 is a bit too many. 15 is fine. The marching monk's robes fluttered even though there was no wind. All right, now is the time. Whoever runs is raised by a worm. Everyone present here was a half immortal. So how sharp were their senses? The slightest movement here would immediately attract countless people's attention. The 3-second severance great elites looked on coldly from the sidelines, not saying a word. The other 3 heavenly manifestations cultivators were happy to watch the eastern sky's excitement. They were afraid that the matter was not serious. Only the other 14 half-immortals who were also from the eastern sky could not sit by and watch, and immediately surrounded them. In this place, they were a single entity, and if they really fought, they would lose the face of the entire Eastern Azure Dragon. The way they mediated was very special. With one look, it was obvious that they were experienced and deeply understood the true meaning of reconciliation. The ones who came to mediate Lu Xiaoyi were 3 monks. Fellow cultivator Yin, don't be rash. With so many people watching, the Eastern Sky's face is important. If you have anger in your heart and want to vent, just come at me. I guarantee that I won't retaliate when hit or scold. A monk pushed his shiny head in front of Lu Xiaoyi. Of course, this was just an excuse. Mediating was divided into true and false persuasion. Those on the same side, mediating, were false persuasion. As they mediated, everyone's anger would be raised, and it would change from a one-on-one duel to a group brawl. There were also all kinds of partial fights. True persuasion was when the opponent's group stepped forward to mediate, such as the monks mediating now and the Taoists mediating the monks. Lu Xiaoyi was surrounded by 3 monks, and the marching monk was surrounded by several Taoists. Lu Xiaoyi was cursing. I have a deep grudge with that monk. In the universe war, there are thousands of casualties in the realms. He is the leader. Say your family has been surrounded, and there are countless casualties. Now that you've finally found your enemy, do you want to beat him up? Perhaps the other celestial beings did not understand his words, but the cultivators of the Eastern Sky all understood. There was no need to guess. The Taoist was a 5th ring, and the monk was a Buddhist for the main world. This enmity could not be resolved, but even if it could not be resolved, it had to be resolved for the time being. There was a monk who was very troubled. Fellow cultivator Yen, I understand your feelings very well, but now that you're causing trouble, everyone's faces will not look good. You'll lose face for the Eastern Sky, and the 2 of you may not really fight. There are still 3 second Severin seniors here, and several dozen spectators. Are you sure they will allow you to cause trouble? In the end, if the dispute cannot be resolved, it will cause the anger of the heavens and the resentment of the people. Everyone's hometown will not be able to watch, so why bother? Lu Xiaoyi knew he was in the wrong, but was still unyielding. Hometown? Can this situation still be seen? The donkey goes east, the mule goes west. I know everyone wants to see the situation at home, but if the heart is not up, then the energy cannot be gathered together. At that time, no one will be able to watch, so can you blame me? There was a monk who took charge and suggested, how about this? We'll set a rule in the Eastern Sky. Every time we watch, 15 people will be responsible for the basic spiritual power supply, and 1 person will be responsible for positioning. Take turns, and no one can play tricks from behind. Whoever dares to do bad things will automatically withdraw. Like this, 15 people in 1 round, fair and reasonable, and the target can choose by themselves. Lu Xiaoyi was still hesitating there, and everyone persuaded him, so he reluctantly agreed. A few monks came forward to coordinate. This method was indeed the best method that the Eastern Sky could find at present, and there was no need to argue about where to watch and where not to watch. In any case, each person would have a chance, and for a period of time, the others only needed to provide support from behind. This was precisely the goal that Lu Xiaoyi wanted to achieve. He deliberately caused trouble in a violent rage in order to draw out this kind of suggestion. Even if the monk did not mention it, with Qing Xian's shrewdness, they would arrange for the Taoists to mention it, and there was only one goal: watch the Hung River realm. This was an open conspiracy. It was impossible for the marching monk to retreat step by step in such a collision and settle things peacefully. This was fundamental and could not be retreated. Even if he knew that this thing must have its own intentions, he could not think of where the trap was for the time being. The universe was really too big. Moreover, ever since he reached the interior realm, he had completely lost the news of the autonomous world and did not know that the Hung River realm hidden behind him had been discovered. The unequal information caused hesitation and judgment, and with a few more Buddhist brothers coming forward, when things came to a head, there was no possibility of refusing. Chapter 1734. P.S. Recently, the weather has been very hot, and Sloth is not good at air conditioning, so the days have been very difficult. It may affect the updates. It will drop to 3 updates a day. If there are more, I won't hide it. I'll post it as much as possible. The weather is hot and stuffy. It's terrible. There are still people who disagreed. For example, the Taoists led by Ma Bailu. The principle they followed was that they had no principles. If the monk agreed, they must oppose. Qing Xian was cunning. They knew that in this small group, they could not ignore the marching monk's rallying power. If he was very cooperative, the bald thief would certainly think that such a wait-and-see strategy could be a trap. The problem of the Hengi boundary was not difficult to guess. Once suspicion arose, they could not reach the final consensus. The swordsman took the lead. His task was to find out how to achieve it. Therefore, they must oppose. A clear-cut opposition, all kinds of prevarication, all kinds of conditions, all kinds of unreasonable pestering. Finally, in the midst of the quarrel, he would pretend to be very wronged. He was very familiar with doing this. After some bargaining, the Eastern Sky people finally reached an agreement. In principle, one person was allowed to watch and the others were not allowed to interfere, let alone stop. Wait, there were many conditions, but the core was that no one could control what he wanted to watch, unless the time was up. When the agreement was reached, the marching monk's heart floated with a trace of uneasiness without warning. He could feel that he might have been played, but he did not know where the problem was. He had been trapped in the interior sky for hundreds of years and knew nothing about the outside world. This was terrible, and it was not a problem that could be solved with wisdom. In the end, there was no internal strife in the eastern sky. This was reasonable. In fact, the other 3 heavens were not that strong, but they did not appear to be so explosive. There were countless cultivators in the universe, and when one was close, there would be no lack of stumbling. This was unavoidable. Yangon made the order on their behalf. The vermilion bird of the southern sky came first, followed by the black tortoise of the northern sky, the white tiger of the western sky, and the azure dragon of the eastern sky. Although it was not explicitly stated, this order was a kind of punishment. The eastern sky was the most chaotic, so they were last. The southern sky was the most harmonious, so they came first. Everyone was well aware of this, and no one came out to say anything. Although there were only 14 people in the southern heaven, they were relatively united. Or rather, the southern heaven cultivators had a stronger sense of teamwork and were more focused on teamwork. After a few attempts, the entire flying crossing stream began to emit a faint light. This light became brighter and brighter, stronger and stronger. Finally, it pierced through the sky and disappeared without a trace. Some cultivators focused on this huge heavenly eye and used the mapping method to find their own home planet. This first step was also the most difficult because this was a base point. As long as they found the base point and extended it out, it would be much easier to find other realms. At the very least, they would know which direction to look in. 14 people searched together. This was just the beginning. There were images rapidly changing in the sky above the flying crossing stream. It was like a huge screen. In the rough screen, there were images of the universe's star atlas. There were countless celestial images and specks of stars. They were all the same. When one looked at the universe from the perspective of the heavenly axiom, one would truly understand how tiring the will of the heavenly axiom was. Every picture was basically the same. It was a picture of stars, countless stars. In the eyes of cultivators with lower realms, they would never be able to find the location of their home planet. However, the cultivators here were different. They were the most talented in the younger generation, the most daring to innovate, and also the most intelligent in making judgments. The 14 people worked together and compared the images of the heavenly eye star atlas with their own home planet or the most familiar star region in their minds. They made judgments among the countless stars. The countless here were truly countless. Every image of the sky projected by the heavenly eye had the existence of millions of stars. This was a huge challenge for the cultivator's brain capacity. Time slowly passed. The southern heaven cultivators were still searching. They had an entire day. In a day, They had to find a familiar realm so that they could accurately pinpoint their location. Then, they would concentrate their spiritual energy into it and begin to enlarge it. Finally, they would be able to clearly see the lives of ordinary mortals and cultivators on that star. Then, they would look for the next one. In a day, the 14 people could find a few homeworlds. That would be the location of their competition. It was possible that everyone would have a chance to find their homeworld, and it was also possible that some cultivators would not have a chance. This was a comprehensive test of this small team's judgment ability in the universe. 2 hours passed, and the Southern Heaven cultivators still had not discovered anything. This was not strange. The universe was too big, and 14 people were too few. If the areas where the 14 of them had once been active were divided out, the proportion that they occupied might not even be 1/10,000th of the entire elephant heaven. What they were competing in was the range of a cultivator's experience. Of course, there was also a large amount of luck involved. If there were 14 otakus, this search would take a lot of effort. Qing Xian frowned. He had already realized that this activity script that the second Severin seniors had prepared for them was not simple. It was much more difficult than he had imagined, especially the first time they had to pinpoint their location. It was extremely important. Hey, how can we use the shortest amount of time to find a familiar realm for the first time? Toss out that rotten idea of yours. After interacting with this guy for 1,000 years, he already had a very good understanding of the swordsman. He would instead often drop the ball when it came to some common sense. But when it came to some difficult problems that others could not solve, this guy would always come up with a whimsical but practical solution, including him. Actually, everyone was very envious of this kind of ability. This was the ability of a freak, and others could not replicate it. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. It was not that he had a groundbreaking idea, but rather that his last life had given him a completely different angle to consider problems, jumping out of the normal mindset of this cultivation world. That was all. 2 hours. The number of stars that the heaven's eye has seen has already exceeded 10,000. Theoretically, with this kind of search intensity, they should be able to find a familiar airspace, but they have not found it. I think that it is not that a familiar airspace has not appeared, but that they have not recognized it when it has appeared. Qing Xian was puzzled. Oh, why? Lu Xiaoyi explained. The angle is different. What the heaven's eye sees is the angle that is projected from the interior sky. For a three-dimensional star map, there are countless observation angles up, down, left, right, front, and back, and from each angle, the star map actually has a different shape. Time is short, and the window of judgment is fleeting. If you still use your own vision to construct the starry sky environment around your mother planet, then it is very likely that you will miss the opportunity. Qing Xian fell in a deep thought. This was a problem that Lu Xiaoyi looked at from the perspective of geometry in his previous life. The same starry sky with countless stars, when viewed from different directions, it could be a circle, a triangular pyramid, or even a cube. If you're already used to describing the appearance of your own realm's starry sky and use it as a standard, then the heavens I will not care about your thoughts when looking at it. It will also not describe the starry sky from the perspective of humans. The heavens, I can only look at it from its own perspective. The difference is inevitable. Chapter 1735. This was a different way of thinking about the three-dimensional construction of space. Magic cultivators rarely paid attention to this aspect, but swordsmen did, especially Lu Xiaoyi. He was a person who was very sensitive to the shape of space. Especially as a swordsman, he sometimes had to place his vision on the flying sword and use it to sense his opponent's movements. This created a contradiction. Although what he saw through his eyes and what he saw through the flying sword were the same thing, the background was completely different. If the flying sword were to shoot from all directions, his mind would have countless three-dimensional images. Through all kinds of data, he would be able to lock onto his opponent's movements and movements. Even the slightest movement would not be able to escape his senses. This was because his senses were omnidirectional and had no blind spots. Therefore, using the flying sword to extend a cultivator's spiritual sense was easier said than done. Not every swordsman could do this. On this point, Lu Xiaoyi had only experienced it from Crow Ancestor. No one else of the same level could do it. He was able to emerge as a new force to be reckoned with. He was able to completely suppress a pure swordsman like Bei Ho with nowhere to run. There were a lot of things involved in this. Not only were they taught in swordsmanship, but they were also things that no one taught him. He naturally possessed them himself. Just like this time, when he encountered the problem of changing the perspective of space. Even someone as strong as Qin Xian could not do it in a short time. Fortunately, with this freak around, he did not have to worry about it. When the two of them first met, Qin Xian often had a short and long temper. However, he slowly realized that if you're not a freak, then you must not follow this freak. You must know what he knows. If this goes on, you will die of exhaustion and be led into a ditch. 4 hours later, someone from the southern sky finally confirmed a location. After locking onto it, he channeled his spiritual energy into his heaven's eye. It was like the magnification of a telescope. The mountains and rivers of that region began to appear on the thick layers of clouds above the Fida stream. It was as if someone was really flying above the region, displaying every mountain, river, city, and forest that he saw clearly in front of everyone's eyes. 2 hours later, another southern heaven cultivator took over and began to choose the next realm. Because of this base point, their search became full of purpose. In less than a moment, another southern heaven realm appeared in the clouds above the flying crossing stream. At this rate, if there were no more delays, Nantian would only be able to see 9 realms in a day. There were still 5 people who would not be able to see their hometowns. In the understanding of mortals, people like them were already considered immortals and should not have so many sorrows. However, in reality, they were just mortals with some ability. Their feelings for their family and country had long been indifferent, but they could not forget their feelings for their sect and their home planet. In the present time when the universe was changing, the strength of the orthodoxy behind them would, to a certain extent, affect the heights they could reach. Who was looking and who wasn't? This could only depend on the internal strife of the southern sky to see who was qualified to do so. A very realistic choice was that the longer they came, the more qualified they were. If you had only been in the interior heaven for a few decades, then the time you had left your home planet was also not long. Giving it to others was the proper attitude. Sure enough, the marching army monk keenly grasped this opportunity and raised this very present question in the group of Eastern Heaven cultivators. Everyone has 2 hours to look at their home planet. In other words, no matter how quickly we discover the first realm base point, even if we discover it at the beginning, we can only have 11 people at most who have the opportunity to look at the home planet. But we have 16 people. Then, does anyone have any good suggestions? This was a neutral statement. If the marching army monk did not mention it, others would, but he deliberately brought it up first, wanting to ignite the anger of the bad-tempered swordsman. From his point of view, only by completely destroying this observation could they completely destroy the conspiracy of the people of the Fifth Ring. Although he still did not know what kind of conspiracy it was, it did not mean that he did not know how to deal with it. The best way was for him and the swordsman to clash, and then everyone's efforts would be for naught, and they would be collectively punished by the Second Severance great cultivators. No matter how bad it was, they had to exclude this swordsman, because in the Battle of the Fifth Ring, they had experienced this swordsman's shocking ability to cause trouble. This was the reason why he took the initiative to provoke. But Lu Xiaoyi and Qin Xian were also not to be trifled with. When it came to playing mind games, that was basically an instinct from the heart. When the marching army monk opened his mouth, the two of them knew his intentions. So, of course, he could not throw a tantrum. No matter, he still had a bear's temper to endure. Ma Lu, how long have you been in the interior heaven? Can you rank in the top 11? To be safe, you have to rank in the top 10. Qin Xian snorted and said, "Strange, if we talk about time, I just happen to be ranked 11th. This is not safe. But that 3 Pure One's brother-in-law of mine is ranked 5th. So let him do it. You communicate with him later. How do you establish contact? Once it starts, let him complete the materialization of the Hung River realm. Lu Xiaoyi was still very calm. He also felt that the marching army monk had already sensed something and was using every possible means to destroy it. So everything had to be considered first. The 16 cultivators of the eastern sky quickly came to an agreement. In fact, the other 3 continents also had the same rule. They did not compete in anything else, and there was no time to compete. They competed in the time to enter the interior heaven, and whoever entered first would be ranked first. After the 11th, there would be no chance. Of course, the first to discover the base point was not limited. In other words, Lu Xiaoyi, who entered the interior heaven the latest, could also observe a scene, but the prerequisite was that the heavens just happened to sweep over the Hung River realm. If it only swept over the 5th ring, blue sky Zhou Xian, then it did not have any practical significance. Qing Xian was even more cautious. Little e, the possibility that you just happened to discover the Hung River realm is too small, so we will not consider this situation. But what we need to consider now is whether the Buddhists will collude and deliberately delay the time. I think they're showing signs of this right now. The marching army monk came very early and is ranked 2nd. If he dilly-dallied in finding his own realm, and the monk ranked 4th continues to delay, then my 3 pure ones brother-in-law may not be safe. We also have to mention that the one ranked 3rd is also an Orthodox Taoist. I will communicate with this matter, and I think it should not be a big problem, but your identification of the realm and direction guidance must be accurate. He had to admit that Qing Xian was a good partner. He was responsible for providing the genius idea, and this Taoist was responsible for the specific implementation. They had a tacit understanding and complemented each other. Okay, you 3 pure ones are good at scheming, but I am not. I will leave it all to you, and I will be responsible for finding the specific location. Qing Xian said angrily, "Don't pretend to be noble. Which one of these schemes was not calculated behind the scenes by you? I am an accomplice. You are the main culprit." Chapter 1736. In the end, only 6 people from the southern sky saw their own home planet. Even though they had a base, they still had to spend time looking for it. However, this kind of search was directional, and the time spent would not be as long as the first time. It was hard to say whether this was a good result. It would depend on the performance of the other 3 heavens. In theory, because of the southern sky's success, the others would always have more experience to learn from. Next was the northern sky. There were 15 people from the northern sky black tortoise. In theory, their results should be better than the southern skies, but their luck was not very good. They wasted a lot of time just looking for the first base. Perhaps it was also because they did not solve the problem of how to quickly compare star fields. The more anxious they were, the harder it was to find the base, which made the northern sky monsters lose face. Of course, it was impossible to see their home planet directly. The home planet might be in some corner. This kind of image had to be compared with the star map in the mind of the cultivators, and it had to solve the problem of different angles. It was quite difficult. Everyone was still laughing at the southern sky's clumsiness, but when the northern sky started, they realized that the southern sky was not that stupid. There was someone even more stupid. They were all the most outstanding cultivators of the human race and were called monsters. However, this title was for humans. In front of the universe, everyone was actually just a child. After a full 10 hours, the northern sky finally found the first familiar boundary. Even though they tried their best to catch up in the second half of the journey, and all of them performed well, they only saw 5 home planets, which was 1 less than the southern sky. If nothing unexpected happened, the northern sky people were at the bottom. The western sky white tiger people were full of confidence. Obviously, they had found a way to quickly identify star maps. In the cultivation world, if it was just a technical problem, there would always be a solution. This time, they had the technique and luck. In less than half an hour, the white tiger people had locked onto the first boundary. This was a good start. If everything went smoothly, seeing 10 boundaries would be stable. If they performed exceptionally, seeing 11 boundaries would not be a dream. But what happened next left everyone dumbfounded. Out of the 17 white tigers, only 11 of them had a chance. It was clear that they hadn't discussed this beforehand and had started arguing over who should go up and who shouldn't. This kind of argument had even affected the stability of the heavenly eye image. It was unknown which demon was behind this, but the heavenly eye image had actually been interrupted. This was an accident. Once the image was interrupted, the heavenly eye could only look for a new reference point when it was restarted. This time, luck was not on the side of the Western Sky people. The result was that after tossing and turning, purely because of man-made reasons, in the end, only 4 people were able to completely view the situation of the mother planet. Just by looking at the expressions of the Western Heavens' white tiger people, one could tell that this matter was not over. After this Dharma assembly, they would look for a few people who were most likely to cause trouble to settle the score. This was a consistent characteristic of the Western Heaven people, with serious internal strife. It seemed that the final first place had already been decided. This was the Eastern Sky, who was waiting at ease for the exhausted Eastern Sky. They had a dispute at the beginning, but now it seemed that their communication was quite good. But this was an outsider's view. Only the Eastern Sky people understood that their internal strife was even more serious. Moreover, they were all wilting. The 16 Eastern Sky cultivators flew across the mountain stream in a decent manner. They didn't need to communicate with each other, and everyone understood the basics. They had already been watching for 3 days, so what else did they not understand? A fine light flashed, and they immediately pierced out. Lu Xiaoyi immediately understood why they had to set a limit of 1 day. Because of this enormous spiritual energy consumption, even if the 16 half-immortals were outstanding talents among people, the most outstanding evildoers of their generation, this kind of continuous, super intense spiritual energy output could only last for 1 or 2 days. Any more, and they would be in danger of overdrafting. Among the 16 people, each person had the right to determine the first bounded domain. There was no restriction on when you could enter the interior sky. Only from a second time onwards would you start to line up. The star atlas image changed every 3 breaths. If no one expressed their recognition within 3 breaths, the heavenly eye would be manipulated to randomly shine at another location of the eastern sky, Azure Dragon. Afterwards, the 16 people would distinguish again. This kind of careless method of casting a net was also helpless. Because the universe was too big, if you only guarded an airspace and expanded it to the side, then it was really possible that after a day, you wouldn't even see a familiar bounded domain. The heavenly eye image streaked across frame by frame. There were those who earnestly distinguished, but there were also those who were perfunctory. For example, a few monks. A monk asked, "Is this okay?" Giving up the battle of the 4 divisions just because of a grudge, and leaving the impression that the eastern sky is not united in front of outsiders. The marching monk's tone became heavier. Eastern sky is united. This is the biggest joke I've ever heard since I started cultivating, including the other 3 heavens. It's just a fig leaf. Everyone knows what's going on in the cultivation world. Also, regarding the importance of this matter, I also want to explain to my 3 senior brothers that this heavenly eye competition is just a small matter that can't be any smaller. At our level, who would care about this little bit of face? For the so-called glory of the eastern sky? But this swordsman scheme is like a fish stuck in my throat, and I have to spit it out. This is the real threat that can affect the cultivation situation of the origin world. Although I don't know what it is, my intuition tells me that it can't be wrong. Our sects all participated in the crusade against the 5 rings several hundred years ago. So on this point, we have to be united. Even if we leave the impression that there's internal strife in the interior realm, even if our results in this heavenly eye competition are the worst compared to the harm that the origin world may suffer, it's all worth it. The marching monk tried his best to unify their thinking. Reaching the half-immortal realm had this disadvantage. Their individual will was too free, and their self-confidence was extremely inflated. It was impossible to just give orders like before. Now, he could only discuss, and he couldn't speak too harshly. These people were all evildoers who set their future as golden immortals. Now that they had the potential to be golden immortals, it was really laughable. If the four of us don't participate in the identification, we can greatly reduce the probability of finding the first reference point. This will drag on for a while. I'm ranked second, so when the time comes to find the boundary, I'll do my best to drag on for as long as possible. Senior brother, Ely, is ranked fourth, so you also need to drag on for as long as possible. Our goal is to exclude the most dangerous Taoist from the list of spectators. That swordsman, needless to say, he has no chance. Qing Xian of the three pure ones is ranked 11th, so there's no need to worry. But don't forget, the three pure ones of the universe are one family. Taoist three pure ones, who is ranked 5th, is very likely to help, so we can't let him have the chance to observe. Why don't we just secretly cause trouble like the western sky? A monk asked. The marching monk sighed. Martial Uncle Lone has already warned me just now. If we act recklessly like the western sky people, we'll be disrespecting the dignity of the interior realm. There will be great punishment, such as restricting us from descending to the lower realm, and so on. So what we can do is to be more covert, more technical, and not brute force. Chapter 1737. Among the 16 people of the eastern sky, 4 of them were working but not putting in any effort. This meant that the 4 people could only helplessly cross the familiar boundary positions. No one could blame them because this matter could not be investigated. Lu Xiaoyi felt that the pressure was not light. In many ways, he needed to immediately determine the correspondence between the heaven's eye and the star Atlas in his mind. At the same time, he also needed to maintain contact with Taoist Kongqiao and Taoist Zenon. Taoist Zenon, Qing Xian's fellow Taoist of the three pure ones, ranked 5th. Needless to say, he fully supported them. He was the one who interfered with the mysteries of heaven. Taoist Kongqiao, ranked 3rd, was the highest-ranking Taoist that Qing Xian could find. He was likely to be on their side. It was unknown what Qing Xian said, but he and Kongqiao reached an agreement in a short period of time. This was very difficult, because Kongqiao was not part of the three pure ones. In the orthodox Taoist sequence, it was actually very chaotic and unconvinced. But this kind of thing was better done by the orthodox Taoists than by outsiders. There were many exclusive exchanges of benefits within the orthodox Taoists. Outsiders would never be able to blend in. In the eastern skies observation sequence, the first was uncontrollable. Whoever caught hold of it would take action. The second was the marching monk, who would definitely delay time. The 3 empty nests were the first star observation position of the 5 rings double jackals plan. The 4th was a monk, who would definitely dawdle. The 5th was Zenon, who was the 2nd star observation position. But Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian both felt that it might not be his turn. Both of them attached great importance to the marching monk. This was not an ordinary person, but an exceptionally powerful opponent. They needed to think of all difficulties and not pin their hopes on so-called luck. Lu Xiaoyi's current pressure was that he had to find the 5 most prominent positions of the 5 rings: Zhuizhou, Zhouxian, Hung River, and Anchor Chain among the countless images. Once he found them, no matter which one it was, he would immediately confirm it and start the first reference point of the eastern sky. The earlier the better, leaving enough time for the later plan. This required a little bit of luck, but obviously luck did not favor the conspirators. Or it could be said that their opponents also had luck. Under the coordination of the marching army monk, the 4 monks used a very ordinary Buddhist sense technique, Buddha's light illumination. The purpose of using the Buddha light illumination to scan the universe with the heavens' eye was simple. The heavens' eye would focus more on the Buddha realms and not the Tao realms. This was not absolute because they would never be able to control a celestial miracle like the heavenly eye, but the probability was definitely biased. And after the Buddha realm appeared, The four of them deliberately pretended to be deaf and dumb. This was also an open conspiracy. Everyone else could feel it, but they had a fair and honorable reason for doing so. It was for the eastern sky to discover the first datum point as soon as possible. As for why he hadn't discovered it yet, of course, it could be attributed to luck. In fact, both the Taoists and Buddhists did not keep their hands clean. The Taoist sect Zenin used heavens to hide the secrets of heaven so that the monks could not guess their intentions. Even someone as strong as the marching monk could not see through it and could only react based on intuition. The Buddhists, on the other hand, used Buddha's aura to illuminate the whole world so that the heavens eye could scan further away from the Taoist boundary. In the whole stargazing process of the cultivators of the four symbols heaven, the southern sky and the northern sky were relatively pure, the western sky was a mess, and the eastern sky was a clear barrier. Under the rules, disputes were played out incisively and vividly. The spectating cultivators couldn't help but shake their heads. The first universe war occurred in the eastern sky, and that was really not a coincidence. Wu-Ma sighed, still hiding the secrets of heaven and Buddha light illumination? What are they trying to do? Are they treating the rules of our interior realm heaven as child's play? Senior brothers, should we stop them or to give them a warning? One Buddha and one Tao remained silent. They could not make a sound because the Taoists and Buddhists had begun to quarrel again. As second severance great elites, there was also a difference between their butts. After a long time, Yangon chuckled and said, "They are just children. Let them make a fuss. How can they rebel?" Guchan did not show any weakness. What do we care? We don't need to care about anything. I think the spiritual conference this time is a joke. The participants are lawless, and the host is also neither fish nor fowl. They can't even take out a reward and still have to rely on little tricks to deceive others. Wu-Ma shut his mouth. The quarrel between these two mainstream orthodoxies had nothing to do with him. It would be best if they were both strangled to death. Lu Xiaoyi was very troubled. He finally understood why this kind of heavenly, immortal world would allow them, these newcomers, to control it and not be listed as some kind of taboo. In truth, it was really very strenuous to control this thing. If it was only to see one's home planet, the effort and gain would be completely disproportionate. This thing was too difficult for half immortals. Perhaps only immortals could control it to display its true effect. Their present search was no different from searching for a needle in a haystack. Their understanding of the universe was still too limited. With a sweep of the heavenly eye, he felt dizzy. Furthermore, it was a combination of over a dozen people with different intentions. But the images of those 5 realms that he was familiar with did not appear from beginning to end. He was very sure. It was useless to complain now, so he could only persevere. Time passed quietly just like that. Bei Feng, who was watching the excitement outside, suddenly had a strange thought. Our southern sky has seen 6, followed by northern skies 5 and western skies 4. According to this pattern, would eastern sky have 3? In any case, it would be a straight. This Dharma conference was indeed surprising because the results and strength were the opposite. However, it could also be seen that these evildoers' attitude towards the activities organized by the seniors of Interior Realm was an indifferent attitude. They also had their own ideas. On the surface, they were very respectful to the seniors, but in fact, they did things their own way. This might change the style of the Interior Realm to a certain extent, but on the eve of the change of the current era, what could not be changed? 3 hours later, Qing Xian, who was concentrating on the process of comparing the star maps, sent a message to Lu Xiaoyi with divine sense. Something's not right. Other than the 4 monks, there must be others who are on the side of Buddhism. Otherwise, it would be impossible that we haven't discovered it yet. Lu Xiaoyi, however, did not care. Man plans, God succeeds. Why are you in such a hurry? This person was able to create such a big scene in the past. His scheming is deep. Take it slow. Don't be too hasty. This was a very strange scene. The 16 half-immortals had been dawdling for several hours, but they still couldn't find a single reference point. This was already beyond common sense. Someone was definitely messing with them, but they couldn't find out who it was. In such silence, the image of the starry sky above the clouds continued to change. It was not until 12 hours later that a Taoist finally found the position of his home planet. After confirming it, the eastern sky officially began to observe the stars. Lu Xiaoyi was a little disappointed because this cultivator's home planet was very unfamiliar to him. If it was his turn next, he actually did not know which direction to move his heavenly eye to scan. This was the reason why the other 3 days were delayed. Chapter 1738. However, Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian did not panic. For them, the most important thing was the location of the next person, marching monk's home planet. If the monk chose a galaxy that they were not familiar with, it would be more difficult for them to find the Hengyu boundary. However, this was not something they could control. This was where the two sides competed against each other. 2 hours later, the first stargazing session in the eastern sky ended. There were only 8 hours left, so Marching Monk took over. Marching Monk controlled the heavens' eye to move slowly. No one could move the heavens' eye to the position they wanted to observe the stars once or several times. They had to follow a certain route and search for the stars bit by bit. It was as if they were flying, but now they were using the heavens' eye's rays instead of flying. He was also hesitating because he was not sure where he would place the stargazing position in the end. Fighting with Taoists in such an occasion required grace. This was the tacit understanding between cultivators. You can't just keep looking and dawdling like this. You can't just waste time until the end and then cut off everyone's thoughts. Competition had its own rules. The rule here was that you had to give your opponent a chance to compete on the same stage. Otherwise, people would think that you were going overboard. This was a big taboo in the cultivation world. The best way was to find a galaxy that the other person was not familiar with to observe the stars. Then it would be difficult for the next person to find the stars. Without a specific direction, they could only follow guesses. Southern sky and northern sky could observe more stars because they communicated with each other and reminded each other. Then the path would be more clear. The marching monk felt that he definitely could not look at his home planet, because his home planet was definitely within the range of the other party's knowledge. If he wanted to look for other star sectors, he did not have many choices. Even someone like Lu Xiaoyi, who had traveled all over the universe, only knew the locations of 5 major star sectors. The marching monk had fewer footprints. Including his home planet, there were only 4 major star sectors to choose from. In other words, there were still 3 directions. Not only did they have to be far from the 5th ring and left Zhou, but they also had to be far from Zhou Xian. This was Marching Monk's intuition. He always felt that these 2 people wanted to use this stargazing session to achieve some purpose, but he did not know what it was. If he didn't know, then he would destroy it. The best way was to make them unable to find the path. At that time, no one would say that it was the Buddhists who had wasted their time. Who else could they blame if they failed to live up to expectations? He didn't dare to say that he would definitely be able to find a place that no one else knew about, so he had to go as far as possible. After more than an hour, he found a great realm. This was the memory of his previous life, a distant memory. What is this place? I've never been there. Lu Xiaoyi was very straightforward. It was the same for Qing Xian. In fact, his footprints were highly similar to Lu Xiaoyi's. They had all flown to Zhou, Xian, and Jindan, and then flew back from the surrounding places. He could only place his hopes on others. Qing Xian began to ask a few Taoists whom she was familiar with, but unfortunately, no one knew. The universe was too big, and humans were insignificant. In front of the universe, human strength was limited. Qing Xian felt defeated. To determine a definite direction in the vast universe was too illusory. There wasn't much time left for them. After the marching army, there were less than 6 hours left. They had to find the path and determine the direction. In other words, they only had one chance. Beifeng looked at the boundary in the sky. It was very familiar. He had been to this place before. It was a great realm at the junction of eastern sky and southern sky. It wasn't too far from his mother planet, and he had set foot in it before. With the current state of these eastern sky cultivators, anyone with a discerning eye could see that Buddhism and Taoism were competing. Now it seemed that Buddhism was slightly better, and they had almost forced Taoism into a desperate situation. There was no need to doubt which side they were sitting on. The problem was, he knew the location of this great realm, but this was only relative to his mother planet. He couldn't tell his friend Lu Xiaoyi, because he knew nothing about the other boundaries of Eastern Sky. Thus, he asked the Netherworld child. The Netherworld child scratched his head. The direction is wrong. I also don't know the direction of Eastern Sky. I only know that the direction out of Southern Sky is Western Sky's bitter plain realm. They also had a friend in the Western Heaven. When I asked him about it, he didn't know the reason at all. Although he didn't know, his friend knew. Friend asked friend to pass the message along. Unexpectedly, they got further and further away from the Eastern Heaven. From the Eastern Heaven, they found the Southern Heaven. From the Southern Heaven, they went to the Western Heaven. Finally, from the Western Heaven to the Northern Heaven, 7 or 8 friends had already joined, and they were all friends of friends. But here, everyone was very interested in stirring up trouble in the already chaotic situation of the Eastern Sky. They were all people who didn't mind stirring up trouble, and nothing could extinguish their desire to meddle in this. The stargazing from before was not very enjoyable. They couldn't vent their exuberant energy. The marching army monk was still observing the boundary. He had 2 hours, but what he didn't know was that the Taoists outside had already changed the path to Northern Sky. With the origin of the yellow dragon as the starting point, the 4-symbol sky was infinitely divergent. But this referred to the vertical direction. If it was horizontal, there was a high probability that it was a closed circle. No matter how far you walked in this circle, the possibility of returning to the starting point was very high. North Wind was still communicating there. Do you know Myriad Domain in Southern Sky? Or Heaven Origin Domain, Black Wind Domain, Great Oblique Galaxy? Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. I don't know. I haven't been to any of your Southern Sky's boundaries. North Wind didn't give up. If you don't know Southern Sky, then I guess you don't know Western Sky either. But what about Northern Sky? Is it also bordering Eastern Sky? Iceberg Domain? Big Dipper Plank Road? Blizzard Plains? Heavenly Bow Constellation? Angel Domain? Zhou Upper Domain? Lu Xiaoyi shouted with his divine sense. Zhou, I'm familiar with that place. Find the best optimal route for me. It's best to go directly from where we are now. You're going a big circle, making my head hurt. It's too obvious. North Wind laughed. So what if it's obvious? Which one of your Eastern Skies matters isn't obvious. You're just short of tearing off all pretense of cordiality and directly attacking. I'll ask my friends in Northern Sky to see if they can go directly from here to Zhou. If they can't, then we can only go in a circle. If they were talking about friends of friends, they could almost cover all the Taoists among the evildoers. They could always form a relationship, no matter what the relationship was. A friend of a friend might not necessarily be a friend, but if they had a common opponent, at least they would temporarily put aside some small disputes. Even so, they didn't find a way to go directly from the marching army monk's boundary to Zhou. It must be admitted that the marching army monk's boundary was very hidden and remote, so the only thing that could be optimized was how to make this big circle shorter. Chapter 1739. Lu Xiaoyi ultimately obtained such a route. Senior Brother Kong Xiao, at that time we may have to take a longer detour. You must be mentally prepared. Kong Xiao was very indifferent. As long as there is a purpose, the detour is not afraid. Actually, he was also a bit curious. What did these two people want to show everyone? It must be very unusual, because the Buddhists were doing everything possible to stop them. This was the way Taoists and Buddhists got along. The more you don't want me to do it, the more I will do it. The more you don't want me to see, the more I will see, and so on. The marching monk finished his stargazing. To be honest, this region was nothing special. There was nothing interesting about it. What everyone wanted to see now was whether the Eastern Heaven Taoists would be able to find their way back before the time was up after the Buddhists of Eastern Heaven found such a remote place. This was also a kind of competition. It sounded a bit like child's play, but in the cultivation world, between these experts and great cultivators, it really was child's play. They called this momentum. Momentum, this kind of thing, could be beaten but not leaked. It could be defeated but not escaped. This was the reason Kong Chao took over the control of the heavenly eye. Under Lu Xiaoyi's command, the scanning direction jumped out. It had already jumped out of the range of the eastern azure dragon elephant sky and entered the southern vermilion bird elephant sky. This was the first time the elephant sky jumped since the start of the event. No one felt strange because in the marching monks' 2 hours of stargazing just now, almost every Taoist had been mobilized and asked if they knew the shortest path. This was a half-open secret. Other than the Buddhist disciples who didn't know, there were also some who sensed it. No one cared about which domain it was. As long as they could find it and observe the stars for 2 hours, it was considered a success. Their search time was also only a little more than 2 hours. The faster they searched, the more faith they had. The heavenly eye's beam jumped to the elephant sky for the first time. The marching monk was happy at first, but soon after, his heart sank. No matter how stupid a cultivator was, he was still an outstanding person who could at least take a step in the primordial spirit realm. It was impossible for him to make such an obvious mistake. There was only one conclusion. The elephant sky jump was intentional. The reason for the jump was because they only knew the path that was the farthest. An eastern heaven cultivator, even if he was a monstrous existence, how could he possibly distinguish between east and west? There was no need to ask. This was the help of the other elephant sky Taoists outside. This was cheating. However, everyone was actually cheating, so it was very difficult for you to raise any objections. In the hearts of these people, protesting was the most tasteless thing. It was like a child looking for an adult after being beaten. To them, whoever hit them, they would return the favor. This was the only counterattack. Therefore, as soon as he released his divine sense, not only did the 4 monks in the eastern heavens loudly chant, even the Buddhist disciples in the other 3 heavens also loudly chant. Chanting Sanskrit was not because his throat was itchy, but to prevent the transmission of divine sense in space. The marching monk could see very clearly that the 2 from the 5th ring might not know the way. Those who knew the way were all outside, communicating with their divine sense and controlling the route. How could the Taoists be willing to back down now that the monks had spoken? At a time like this, going head-on was the only way. That was momentum. That was confidence. Every time he changed his moves, he would show weakness. This was tit for tat. The Taoist Sutra was the most popular scripture in Taoism. Everyone knew it. But now, it was being recited not only to compete in whose voice was louder, but also to escort the Taoists who were familiar with the path to pass their divine sense to the empty nest. Tell them where to go. The flying crossing stream suddenly became lively. In the interior heaven, such a lively scene had not appeared for many years. This was a dispute, but it was also an elegant atmosphere. Didn't they not fight? Everyone maintained their bottom line when they targeted Zhongdu. This showed that they were still rational. In such a situation, the elders of the interior realm were well aware that the best solution was to not disturb them. It would be the worst if they interfered. Under the interference of the Buddhist sect, the communication of divine sense became difficult, but it was not to the extent of being completely cut off. There were far more Taoists present than monks, but it was easier to destroy than to build. Under the overall situation, the message could still be transmitted, but it was slower. Sometimes, it had to be repeated many times to ensure accuracy. At the very least, the Buddhist sect had achieved their goal of stalling for time. The transmission was divided into several parts. The Taoists outside judged the location according to the celestial bodies in the clouds above the flying crossing stream and optimized the best direction. Then, they passed it to the north wind. He was now the leader of the other 3 heavens, so he was very happy. Then, the north wind passed it to Lu Xiaoyi, and finally, Lu Xiaoyi passed it to Kong Chao to execute. This process was somewhat complicated and not refined enough, but it was the most suitable method at the moment. If the cultivators were not close friends, it was easy to have misunderstandings due to tone, attitude, habits, and other reasons. In such a situation, a single misunderstanding could be fatal. If they were familiar with each other, they would be able to tolerate and understand each other, communicate with each other, and answer questions casually. This was the reason why all these parts had to exist. In a hurry, it was impossible to have a direct conversation. Taoist Kong Chao was born in Taiji and was an orthodox Taoist. This person was very determined. The operation of the heavenly eye was stable, fast, and not chaotic. He could complete the message sent by Lu Xiaoyi without the slightest error. It had to be said that with such a person, their plan had a possibility of being realized. The heavenly eye steadily swept across the southern sky. The speed was not fast because of the hindrance of the Buddhist sect, but the goal was firm and never changed. After 45 minutes, the heavenly eye beam left the southern sky and arrived at the western sky. The people outside began to change, and a few Taoists from the western sky who were familiar with the western sky took over. Everyone was very careful, very careful. No one wanted to lose to the Buddhist sect. The difference in the number of heavens was no longer important. What they were comparing now was the orthodoxy. They could not drop the ball at this time. The marching monk's heart was moved. The heavenly secret that had been concealed for a period of time was finally broken by him. In an instant, he understood the final goal of the fifth ring's difficult situation. Could it be the Hung River realm? Could it be? Unfortunately, he did not have any good ideas now. If he had cracked this secret earlier, even if he had to throw away his face, he would have continued to dawdle while he mastered the heavenly eye, so that the fifth ring would not have any chance. But now, the heavenly eye was in the hands of the Taoist. He could only use one method, which was to secretly play tricks like the Western Sky people to make the heavenly eye lose its spiritual power support and restart. But the side effects of this were too serious. Almost everyone was involved in a dispute in the open, but you used the method of flipping the table and not playing to resolve it. What you lost was not only his face, but also Buddhism's face. Just like two people playing chess, there were countless bad moves behind each person's back. Although there were no rules, fortunately, there was a bottom line. If you flipped the chessboard when you saw that you were about to lose, that was another matter. It would give people the impression that you could not afford to lose. Not only would the Taoists look down on you, even the Buddhist disciples of the other three heavens would look down on you. Winning fair and square and losing fair and square was the basic philosophy of these people. If he dared to flip the table, he would not be able to order these monks around in the future. There was another reason that he was even more afraid of. If one day the Hung River realm was really exposed, then what would his actions today mean? It would be the ironclad evidence of collusion with the Hung River realm. He could imagine that if he really flipped the table, the fifth ring would definitely put a bucket of sh*t on his head. He could not hide because this was the truth. Chapter 1740. One of his senior brothers asked him, "Junior brother, if we don't use our psyche, I'm afraid we won't be able to stop the Taoists." Xing Jun said generously, "It's okay. We Buddhist disciples don't care about such despicable things. Tell our brothers to just do their best and don't worry about it. Even if the Taoists find one of their home planets, it will only be a draw. There's nothing for us to be ashamed of." Secretly contacting the Hengi River system was the core secret of him and his sect. These Buddhist disciples didn't know about it. If it was leaked, he was sure that most of them wouldn't stand on his side. This was because such an action was already crossing the bottom line. It wasn't only the Taoists who were hostile to the insects. The Buddhists were hostile too. Helping Zerg and the Winged Man was a huge controversy in the entire Buddhist system. Even if he was a half-immortal, he couldn't shoulder such a responsibility. There must be no evidence. You could suspect, but you can't be sure. This was what he had to ensure. His only hope now was that it was impossible to find a perfect path in the universe. There would always be unexpected difficulties. Just like the cultivators from the other three heavens, they often got lost in the search. After all, Looking at this unfamiliar universe through the heavenly eye, there was always a gap. Hengi sector was not easy to find. There were countless stars in that place, and they were especially dense. There were also many sectors around it. When the density of stars in a certain sector reached a certain level, it actually looked like a bright galaxy from afar. There were countless galaxies like this in the universe, and it was the hardest to distinguish between them. He hoped that he guessed wrong. 2 hours later, the heavenly eye had already scanned the northern heaven for a long time. Under the perseverance of the Taoists, they were moving towards the largest city, Zhousien. At this time, there was still more than 2 hours left. There is still time. Do we need to guard against the Buddhists' desperate actions? Lu Xiaoyi asked. Qing Xian snorted. No need. If he dares to cause trouble, I'll dare to make things worse. To the outside world, there's a heretical orthodoxy, but some Buddhist sects are covering for it. When there's an argument, they will definitely demand to see what's going on. By then, Xing Jun won't be able to clear his name even if he jumps into the heavenly river. I do hope that he will do so, but this person is black-hearted and vicious. I'm afraid he won't give us this chance. Lu Xiaoyi corrected him and said, Ma Lu, when it comes to being cunning, I don't think you are inferior to him. Qing Xian ignored him. I'm not familiar with the last part of the journey, from Zhousien to Hung River. Don't make any mistakes. They've already helped us to the 3 phenomenons heavens, but we're the ones who dropped the ball when we returned to the eastern heavens. Lu Xiaoyi interrupted him. There's no such problem. Back then, I flew all the way from the origin world. Do you think I'm the same as you? I'm just slacking off in the negative space. Finally, they saw the upper realm of Zhousien. Junior brother Yin, I've done what you asked of me. Is there anything else I need to do? Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. Please thank those who helped me. After the spiritual assembly, my friends will treat everyone to a meal. Now, all of you just need to watch quietly. Who knows? Maybe you'll have some thoughts. Starting from Zhousien, the route was completely under Lu Xiaoyi's command. Their speed increased dramatically. The marching monk was expressionless, but he knew very well that the other party's goal was the Hung River boundary. There was no mistaking it. The 5th ring cultivator had been in Zhousien for a long time. This route was not a problem for them. What he needed to consider now was not how to stop the other party, but how to control the direction of public opinion after the Hung River boundary was exposed to the interior world. He knew the 5th ring cultivator's purpose too well. However, this was an open conspiracy. Even if you discovered it, you could not cover it up. In the cultivation world, the more you covered, the more you leaked. He knew this very well. The best way was to lead the way. However, he was at a loss as to how to lead the other party. 1,000 words were better than 1,000 words. At this point, he had lost the best window of time to stop the other party. Unfortunately, he did not discover that the 5th ring cultivator had entered the interior world, especially that Xinyuan wolf. Wherever he went, there would be a storm of blood. In order to control all of this, the prerequisite was to control these 2 people who were in cahoots. Either get them out of here, or destroy them humanely. Only then could he bring up the problem of how to control public opinion. The marching monk's thoughts had already been placed after the Dharma assembly. He no longer cared about the current situation's development. This was the essential quality of an outstanding leader, admitting defeat and then thinking about how to make up for it in the future, rather than being unconvinced and indignant here and pestering him to put himself in an even more awkward situation. Wasn't this exactly what these 2 fellows wanted him to do? The images scanned by the heavenly eye appeared on the clouds in the sky. It was like an enormous ruler measuring the universe, until a yellow-green star appeared in the middle of a resplendent galaxy. Lu Xiaoyi stared at it and softly said to Empty Nest, "That's it." Empty Nest was also very tired. Although there was someone to guide him, the operation was his own responsibility. He needed to integrate the mental strength of all the eastern sky cultivators to mobilize the heavenly eye. Now, he had finally arrived at his destination. Next, he only needed to concentrate his attention on this star and begin to enlarge and refine it. Qing Xian's requirements for him were very clear. He He had to display every aspect of his star as much as possible. This required him to open the magnifying function of the heavenly eye to the extreme. It was different from the previous stargazing cultivator's cursory observation. Why? He was also very curious. As a result, in the clouds above the flying crossing stream of the interior sky, this star's true appearance was completely revealed in front of the world. Its mysterious veil was lifted, just like a prostitute lifting her skirt. That river, the slums, the temple, there are mainly these three directions. Senior Marshall brother can choose between them. Lu Xiaoyi was very meticulous and very considerate as he handed over his own experience. It was as if the heavenly Tao's point of view had first started from that grand and dirty, continuous and turbid river. Everything that the Peacock Yang gods had seen at that time had once again evolved here. It was the same 1,000 times, eternally unchanging. It was as if the history of Hengi boundary was forever fixed in this scene. Because the belief in God was placed in the first place, the humans here didn't care too much about their current living conditions. They were born for the sake of death, for the sake of reincarnation after death, to be able to take a step forward. Then, in countless reincarnations, they would repeat their own miserable lives over and over again. Of course, this was for the majority of the lower caste people. Empty Nest instantly understood their thoughts. Taoists had innate intuition in this regard. They knew what their companions wanted to express and what goals they wanted to achieve. Therefore, the scene was forever switching back and forth between the terrible scene on both sides of the river and the dazzling splendor of the countless temples of God. It was constantly contrasting between the lower caste slums and the upper caste rich areas. When these comparisons were vividly displayed in front of everyone, an atmosphere was born in the hearts of the flying crossing stream of cultivators. Chapter 1741. For these people, the first principle of cultivation was to be kind to mortals. It was a matter of course, the cornerstone of cultivation, and it had been the same for thousands of years on the path of cultivation. Perhaps their hands were stained with blood, but very little of it was the blood of mortals. Perhaps their living conditions were far better than mortals, but that was the ability of cultivators. They had to ensure that the mortals in their cultivation planets could live with dignity. But everything in front of them had subverted their understanding. There were actually people who could stand above all living things in the name of God. And one life after another, this kind of orthodoxy should be exterminated. The answer was out. The Eastern Heaven Taoist sect wanted to display such a place in the interior sky. Their goal was very clear, and no one could not guess it, but no one felt like they were fooled. And what role did the Eastern Heaven Buddhist sect play in this? It was very thought-provoking. Wuma sighed. The two five-ring freaks borrowed our stage and used our trust just to achieve their goals. They wanted to avenge the humiliation they suffered during the battle between the five-ringed cultivators. But you have to admit, they are very smart. They showed their goal, but you can't say no. In any case, I can't say it. Also, if there are similar newcomer assemblies in the future, don't look for me. I can't afford to lose face like this, to be played by a group of juniors. It's also because my back is not strong enough that my storage ring is not satisfied. He was being sarcastic here, but the Taoist One Buddha's mood was completely different. Yangon said proudly, "Yes, young people are a bit too much, but they can be considered responsible. They have the courage to take responsibility. At this time of great change in the universe, this kind of behavior can be forgiven." Gu Chan's face was cold, but some things could not be avoided. Fellow Taoist is right. I have no objections. Hung River region, in the cultivation world of the universe, was actually not as nameless as imagined. Even in the interior sky, there were actually some half-immortals who knew of the existence of this orthodoxy. In this world, there was no such thing as a completely hidden orthodoxy. The so-called hidden was only for low-level cultivators. The higher one went, there were no secrets. But knowing was one thing, and doing something about it were two completely different concepts. There were many reasons for this. The Hung River was large enough, and it wasn't as if there was no one protecting it, in the spirit of avoiding unnecessary trouble. And in addition to the fact that this orthodoxy knew its place, it was able to survive for hundreds of thousands of years. In the cultivation world of the universe, there were many people who deviated from the orthodoxy, and there were even some who were crazier and more outrageous. However, if everyone pretended not to see it, and if someone put these things out for everyone to see, this was not the same thing. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, even if someone pretended not to see, how could they adapt to the trend of the universe's changes? In this turbulent era, it was fine if they didn't know about this orthodoxy. But once they knew about it, it would be the best gift to the changing of the epoch. It was exposure. It was the supervision of public opinion. When the truth came out, no one could cover it up, and no one dared to cover it up. That was why the marching monk had long given up on struggling. He couldn't sink any deeper. If he sank any deeper, he wouldn't be able to climb out, and he would drag his sect down with him. This time, everyone looked at the stars very seriously. Even after 2 hours, no one called for them to stop. The clearer they saw, the more reason they would have in the future, and they wouldn't have to bear the psychological pressure, and they could truly be unbridled. This was what the heavenly eye saw. If a realm was like this, it was equivalent to turning into the heavenly Tao to observe, and there was no possibility of it being fake. After 3 hours, the one-day time limit was up, and everyone withdrew from the heavenly eye. They were still reflecting on everything they saw in the Hengi realm. However, someone had already expressed his stance. With such an orthodoxy, we cultivators definitely can't sit by and do nothing. If there's a chance, the Eastern Heaven Buddhist sect is willing to be the vanguard. Everyone looked and saw that the one who spoke was none other than the most famous evildoer of the Eastern Heaven Buddhist sect, the marching monk. Some praised him for his hatred of evil, and of course, there were also those who doubted his motives. But no matter what, this sentence was to clear his name. I didn't know that you wanted to see such a place, or I wouldn't have stopped you. Lu Xiaoyi's divine sense chuckled. Forerunner, I'm afraid he's anxious to silence us. Ma Lu, do you think we should give him this chance? Qing Xin smiled sinisterly. Of course. Why not? It's best if he, the vanguard, can solve all the problems. Then I'll be happy. I'm just afraid he doesn't have the ability. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. He shouldn't have come out personally. It's better to say this through other monks. Now, isn't it a little too eager to prove his innocence? And trying to cover up makes it more conspicuous? Qing Xin also shook his head. You're wrong. In the cultivation world, there are countless shady and dirty things. Everyone has them, and no orthodoxy is clean. So actually, to us, it's not hard to guess what the marching monk and his orthodoxy did. There are hundreds of people here, and all of them are outstanding elites. Which one of them is stupid? They all understand in their hearts. But in the cultivation world, there's no need to be afraid of you doing something wrong. The key is your attitude. For example, what the marching monk said just now is actually to express to everyone. There is indeed an inside story, but since everyone doesn't like it, then I'll abandon the darkness for the light and destroy it to maintain the orthodoxy of the cultivation world of the universe. This is attitude. There's nothing wrong with it. So you have to stand out yourself. If he really stands out, then no one will think of investigating the relationship between East Heaven's Buddhists and Hengi sector. Everyone will just take care of Hengi together. After all, this is the problem of Hengi sector's orthodoxy, not East Heaven's Buddhists. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't help but sigh. The noble circle is really messy. The water is really deep. So hypocritical. Qing Xin disagreed. You speak as if you're so noble and spotless. The cultivation world is originally a big shit pit. When it's calm, everyone can still get by. After a long time, a layer of shit will form on the shit pit, and the stench won't be that bad. Now, the universe is changing, and the era is changing. The wind is coming, and the shit scabs are being blown apart. Yet, there are still shit stirrers like you. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. This marching monk is a character. He looks reckless, but he's actually very decisive. He admitted that he wanted to stop others from pursuing the matter, and he killed to satisfy everyone's wishes. Looks like we won't be able to splash this pot of dirty water on him. Qing Xian nodded. I'm already very satisfied that this matter can be done to this extent. You can't use up all your power, and you can't enjoy all your blessings. These opponents have to be dealt with one by one. Don't always think of eating a fatty in one bite. Now that the marching monk said this, we don't have to worry about his Buddhists leaking secrets. These things can't be verified. There are countless capable people in the interior realm, and we can't be careless. At the very least, as long as these new half-immortals can go down, they can basically pull them down. Dozens of masters with sun god strength are decisive forces. But that's not what I'm worried about. Chapter 1742. What are you worried about? Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. Qing Xian was very serious. Marching monk is extremely shrewd and ruthless. He knows when to advance and when to retreat, and he doesn't lack the determination to go all out. In the Battle of the Five Rings, he suffered a small loss at your hands. Now, in Interior Realm, you forced him to kill his own hidden allies. With such karma, how can he let you go? So, although on the surface he took a step back, he definitely won't just defend and not attack. He must have thought of a plan to take revenge on you. You have to be careful, and it's best not to go out blindly. Although Interior Realm has been peaceful these years, there are still many life and death battles. There were originally more than 62 of these monsters, but now there are only these few left. Don't mess around too much and accidentally fall into the shit pit. Lu Xiaoyi felt that something was wrong. What do you mean by suffering a small loss at my hands? So this has nothing to do with you? Now you're pretending to be a little white flower? Qing Xian looked at him quietly. Xiaoyi, I've been in Interior Realm for more than 200 years, and Marching Monk has done nothing. How many years have you been here? You forced him to break his own limbs. Tell me, if you were the monk, who would he treat as his main opponent? I admit that I mess around too, but I do it with a toothpick. You're different. You're using a large scoop. Lu Xiaoyi felt a little wronged, but it didn't matter. They were all first severance, primordial divinity, and it was just that the monk was a few hundred years ahead of him. After coming to Interior Realm, he had been controlling his emotions. If he could use words, he would try not to use them. This was to avoid attracting hatred and make things easier in the future. People needed to grow. If you killed someone here, his friends and teachers would bear a grudge, and it would affect a group of people. But now, after seeing the scenery of Hung River, this taboo no longer existed. This Dharma conference was not a success, but it was also not a failure. At least it allowed these young monsters to get to know each other, and that was the biggest benefit. Regarding the Hengi realm, other than the marching monk, no one else expressed their opinions. This was the shrewdness that a half-immortal should have. No one opened their mouths and shouted. That would be too shallow. The thorns had already been planted. In fact, they were just waiting for a certain time to mature. They were all major cultivators, so they still had this bit of patience. Looking at the empty flying cross-stream, there were only 3 people left. Other than Fifth Ring, who was in a sorry state, there was also North Wind. Lu Xiaoyi didn't invite him. Since he stayed, it meant that he wanted to be involved in the future. This was something he was willing to do, and others couldn't force him to do so. He must have his own considerations. These were not important. What was important was his attitude. If he stayed, he would be a friend. What do you think? Qing Xian asked. She had to admit that whenever she was with this guy, she had no choice but to follow his rhythm, regardless of whether she was willing or not. Strike while the iron is hot. Lu Xiaoyi did not hesitate. Qing Xian nodded. There was a time limit to the memories. As time passed, the memories would fade away. There were countless challenges for cultivators. The more time passed, the more troublesome things would be. until the problem of Hung River was no longer the main problem. This was probably what the marching monk hoped for. Lu Xiaoyi asked, I still have one thing I don't understand. What are the conditions for leaving the interior sky? You guys have been here for so long, and no one has been able to leave. Why do you say there is still hope? Where is this change? Northwind lightly coughed, no longer keeping it to himself. What he didn't expect was that fellow Taoist Yin, who seemed so relaxed and casual, was actually the protagonist of the last great universe war. Not only that, but he was also from the Sword Mountain range and was famous for his savagery and bloodthirstiness. This was an opportunity. If they were to be associated with this person, their cultivation would no longer be peaceful. It was also a taboo. If they were to stand together, there would be endless trouble. He chose an opportunity. This was a normal choice in this era. Of those who came here, which one of them wished for their future to be ordinary? Theoretically, we can leave, but we need to wait. Among our group of people, there are more than 10 who cut their corpses after they became yang spirits, or they quickly became yang spirits after they cut their corpses. Although they are young, they have completely met the requirements of the interior heaven since ancient times to be qualified as ancient method half-immortals. Therefore, they can't leave. They are truly imprisoned. The remaining 40 or so are basically in the primordial spirit realm. Only this group of people is in an awkward situation of being neither high nor low in the interior sky. The so-called leaving here refers to this group of people. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Well, it seems that yang spirit is one of the criteria. North Wind continued. This is only in theory. In the past few hundred years, many young half-immortals have tried to leave here, but none of them succeeded. Therefore, everyone is very confused about what conditions must be met to leave. There are all kinds of speculations, but now it seems that there is only one possibility left. That is when the next innate Tao collapses. If the collapse of the innate Tao is used to measure the changes of the entire universe, it can be divided into 3 periods. The first 12 periods are the early period, the middle 12 periods are the middle period, and the last 12 periods are the last period. We are now at the end of the early period, but the middle period has not yet begun. When we truly enter the middle period, the symbol will be the collapse of the 13th innate Tao. From the middle period onwards, the forces involved in the universe's disputes will no longer be limited to the cultivators of the main world. There will be various demons and ghosts joining in. We don't know which ones there are exactly. This is the arrangement of the heavenly Tao. However, our group may be one of the groups that will be granted freedom. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. What a thoughtful arrangement, adding layers upon layers. So, whether it is the interior sky or the exterior sky, everyone will be released in the end? Northwind nodded. Exactly. However, the judgment of the older generation is that they may be able to regain their freedom in the end period, or at the end of the middle period. It's hard to be sure. The changes of the universe are not only a matter of the universe, but also a matter of cultivators. No change can be separated from the participation of humans. Under this premise, the imprisonment can only be temporary and cyclical. It can't last forever. This is the law of the heavenly Tao. When the last few fragments break around the end of the era, I'm afraid even the immortals will be involved. That will be a different scene. I don't dare to think about it. Lu Xiaoyi was deep in thought. It was similar to what he had imagined. According to this rhythm, the problem of the Hung River domain had to be solved immediately. Otherwise, it would be more troublesome as time passed. Who dared to say that the Hung River domain had no reinforcements? Strike first and gain the upper hand. This was the best way to sneak attack. They had to wait until the Hung River domain reacted and reinforcements arrived. As soon as the 13th innate Tao was broken, they would immediately be attacked. They could not wait any longer. Chapter 1743. Qing Xian was also aware of this problem. We can't wait. If the middle phase is going to begin, then let us give it a grand opening. The life and death of a realm. This amount is not bad, but we can't do it with just 40 or 50 of us. There are nearly 100 young gods in Hung River, and they are extremely powerful, so we need to work together. We need the cooperation of the main world. We need someone to go down and contact them before the collapse of the 13th Great Tao. There's still a long time to cross. This task is too difficult. The key is that we don't have enough people. North Wind couldn't do anything. He couldn't leave either, and he couldn't even spread the news. When he could go down, the attack would begin. How would he have time to contact the main world? Qing Xin wasn't in a hurry. She looked at Lu Xiaoyi. It's okay. With you around, it won't be a problem. I'll leave this to you. I'll be responsible for leading these interior realm half-immortals down as soon as the Great Tao collapses. You'll be responsible for coordinating the main world's cultivation forces. This shouldn't be difficult, right? Anyway, you know a lot of people. You have a card at your waist. Follow whoever you want. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. This was a F*** easy task. Although it had only been 100 years since the last collapse of the Five Realms, the next collapse would only take 200 to 300 years. This time was very tight. This was because it took a long time for the cultivators to be mobilized. For example, it would take more than 200 years for the group of young gods to go from the Five Rings to Hung River Realm. What about the other allies? Zhou Xian? Heaven's Choice? Anchor Chains? Immemorial Beasts? It wasn't that they lacked these forces, but as his realm increased, he understood a principle. If he wanted to fight, he had to pull together a multi-realm alliance. This was his attitude and position. Not only did he pull in these people, but he also pulled in the powerful backers behind them. If someone wanted to overturn the case in the future, he wouldn't succeed. This was because with so many collusions, how could you turn the case around? This was influence. Under the influence of the general trend, everything was successful. It didn't matter if what you did was right or wrong. Everyone did it, so it was settled. Qing Xin continued. Xiaoyi, it's not that I want to make things difficult for you, but in the current interior sky, can you find someone else to go down earlier? Not me, not the North Wind, and definitely not the Marching Monk, because we all came to the interior realm through normal means. You're different. You came in through the back door. North Wind's eyes widened. There's a back door to interiors? Qing Xin nodded, of course. In this cultivation world, can you find a place with me where there is no back door? There were interior masters, exterior masters, and celestial court masters too. The cultivation world had it, the mortal world had it, the imperial palace had it, and the young lady's boudoir had it as well. Mortals call this a backup plan, but we call it the evasive one. I've asked the elders of my sect to check the records of cultivators entering and leaving the center of the interview sky. In the past few decades, there were only 3 cultivators who entered and didn't leave. But in fact, there are 4 more people in the interview sky. Little E, do you dare say that you didn't sneak in through the window? I've known you for all these years. You've never walked through the main door. You've always been sneaky, and you call it the unconventional way. The two of them looked at Lu Xiaoyi awkwardly. It's not that I wanted to go in through the back door. Isn't this just a coincidence? But just because I can crawl in doesn't mean that I can crawl out. North Wind laughed. You definitely can. Junior brother, Yin didn't leave any traces in the interior sky, which means that you don't need to follow the rules of the interior sky, because there's no record of you in the interior sky. But I don't think you can take the normal way, so you can only go back where you came from. Qing Xin didn't care about his feelings. She just felt that this person was like a cockroach that couldn't be killed. She didn't need to worry about his tolerance. She just needed to add more burdens. Before you leave, there are a few people you need to meet. The crowing rooster prince comes from the Heaven's Choice continent. With his support, you can pull out a group of people from the Heaven's Choice continent. Isn't it too far? From the 5th ring to Heaven's Choice is 1,000 years. Have you considered the time? Lu Xiaoyi didn't want to go. Qing Xin ignored him. That's your problem. I'm only responsible for the arrangements. Heaven's Choice, you have to go because there are still immemorial beasts there. Pull in all the vicious beasts and sacred beasts, especially the black dragons. You'll have to rely on them to deal with the eternal river. Zhou Xian is right next to Heaven's Choice. How can we let go of the cultivation forces in this region? If there's enough time, Anchor chain, floating, sinking, and light should also go. They're all forces. At this time, it's not good to pull any of them down. They can choose not to come, but we can't not call them because this is a big matter in the eastern sky. Everyone has to go. Although light doesn't get along with us, this princely lien of the dendrobium is very different. In the face of major issues, he'll make the right choice. So you have to meet him. I'll arrange it for you immediately. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Ma Lu, when did you change your profession to be a butler? If I follow your arrangements, I'll die of exhaustion. According to what you said, if I have to meet this and that, does that mean I have to meet the marching army monk as well? Qing Xian chuckled. Of course he can't run away. However, I can't arrange for this person, and I don't think I need to. He'll naturally find you. If he can kill you, I don't think he'll hold back. If he can't kill you, then he can only cooperate with you on this matter, Lu Xiaoyi said angrily. Then what if I'm killed? Qing Xian chuckled. I'll take care of your senior sisters for you. Northwind was very regretful. Unfortunately, my sect is too far away. Qing Xian shook her head. Junior brother Northwind, I appreciate your good intentions. This time's Hung River operation is actually a joint effort of the Eastern Sky's major realms to send out troops. The situation of the other 3 heavens half-immortals cannot be expanded too much. It's easy to be used by people with ulterior motives. We'll pull people from the interior sky. Little E will go to the main world to gather troops. When the 13th fragment collapses, everyone will gather at Hung River boundary to work. Lu Xiaoyi was very dissatisfied. Do we still need to pull people from the interior sky? I say, Ma Lu, you're really shameless now. All the dirty and tiring work is mine. You're just going to sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor in the interior sky? Qing Xian was indifferent. You just wait here for news. Don't run around. We don't have time to find you. Let's go, North Wind. Those princes aren't easy to talk to. We have to hurry. North Wind asked, if junior brother Lin Yin stays here, will those Buddhists come looking for him? Qing Xian smiled. Don't worry, he won't die. This person's life is very tough. You don't have to worry about him. In the interior sky, the competition between the evildoers had never stopped. There were rules. Of course, you could eliminate the competitors in your heart. This was within the scope of the competition for the Great Tao. However, these actions were all individual actions, especially in a place like the interior sky. No one set any rules, but to compete for the Great Tao, one had to compete with pride. Chapter 1744. Lu Xiaoyi obeyed the arrangement, even though he was reluctant. Qing Xian's arrangement was the only feasible plan at the moment. To him, the difficult part was how to leave the interior heaven, how to travel across those realms in the shortest time possible. The previous difficulty was how to keep it a secret, but now he no longer needed to worry about this problem. Even if it was Marching Monk, since he wanted to kill him, his desire to keep it a secret was more serious than others. The current difficulty was more realistic. The problem of space transportation was a pain that could never be erased in the hearts of cultivators. He waited alone at the flying stream, hoping that Marching Monk would come and settle the grudge. Qing Xian was the one who understood him the most. He knew that he had wanted to get rid of the monk for a long time. It was troublesome to find someone in the interior heaven, so he might as well take the opportunity to let the monk come to him. Between cultivators, this was the simplest and most direct method. He believed that Marching Monk would think the same. Such a person would not be afraid of the swordsman's reputation and stop moving forward. This was the cornerstone for further progress. He guessed right. Marching Monk and a few other monks traveled together, but they stopped after a few days. I still have some things to do, so I won't be with you. The monks understood. In fact, after Marching Monk shouted that last sentence, the key point in the middle could no longer be hidden. The relationship with the Hangi realm was nothing. It was just a kind of use. If they were discovered, there would be a way to deal with it. If they could keep it a secret, there would be a way to keep it a secret. In the struggle of the universe, there was no one. One of the senior brothers, who was at the first severance of Sun Spirit, suggested, "Can I help you?" Marching Monk clasped his hands and declined. I'll deal with my own business. He's my nemesis, and also a hurdle that I can't avoid. Everyone was silent. On the path of Tao, everyone had their own hurdles, and no one could help anyone. If they acted rashly, it would not be helping but harming. They would not worry about any traps. Just as Marching Monk would deal with it alone, the swordsman would definitely wait alone. This was dignity, an essential quality of an interior heaven cultivator. They clasped their hands and said goodbye without hesitation. They had experienced this kind of parting countless times, and they would definitely experience it more in the future. No one could avoid it. In the sky above the flying cross stream, the two of them looked at each other from a distance, not saying a word. This was a battle of fate, and there was no way to escape. In fact, in terms of personal grudges, the two of them had never crossed paths before. However, after the 5-ring battle, both of them regarded each other as their greatest enemy. Marching Monk was responsible for strengthening Buddhism, while Lu Xiaoyi was responsible for reviving the sword vein. In this sense, there was an irreconcilable conflict between them. Marching Monk won the first round and achieved his goal in the 5-ring battle. Lu Xiaoyi returned the favor and forced Marching Monk to break his own arm. However, this was an overall trend. There was bound to be an end between them. This was the way of cultivators. In silence, the Marching Monk entered his natal Great Tao, the Great Tao of Nirvana. In the blink of an eye, Lu Xiaoyi, who knew a little about Nirvana, understood his roots. Nirvana was the result of practicing Buddhism. There were a total of 4 kinds of nirvana in Buddhism that cultivators could achieve. Nirvana that was originally pure but polluted, nirvana that had more than one meaning, nirvana that had no meaning, and nirvana that had no place to stay. Hinayana cultivators could achieve nirvana that had more than one meaning and nirvana that had no meaning. After Hinayana cultivators cut off their own thoughts, the highest realm they could achieve was called the Arhat realm. This realm referred to the elimination of all 7 senses, leaving only the 8th sense. The cultivators of Mahayana Buddhism did not follow the path of Hinayana Buddhism. In other words, the cultivators of Hinayana Buddhism were determined to enter the 3 realms and had no compassion for the masses. On the other hand, the cultivators of Mahayana Buddhism were determined to become Buddhas and had boundless magical power, living in the 3 realms. In addition to the above 4 kinds of nirvana, there was another kind of great nirvana, which was commonly known as Avatar Samyak Sambodhi. It meant the Dharmakaya of Buddha. Marching Monk's great Tao lay in this. Nirvana was constant. It was the unborn method. It was not born due to fate and combination. It was an unconditional existence. Nirvana was joy because there was no suffering here. Nirvana without self meant that nirvana was not owned by me, not myself. There was no nirvana in me, and there was no me in nirvana. Death, nirvana, and nirvana could not be understood as entering a place or realm called nirvana. Nirvana did not have the concept of coming, going, entering, and exiting. It was an unconditional existence. If it was reflected in a battle, it would be unkillable. He was no longer me. So where could I find this person? Unless I could break this person's nirvana state, the flying sword would be useless. This was the battle scene after a cultivator reached a higher level. The application of the Tao state had reached an incredible level. The most important thing was that this monk had taken another step on the basis of nirvana. Lu Xiaoyi also knew about nirvana, but his understanding of nirvana was not on the same level as Marching Monk's, so he could not break it. This was also the reason why Marching Monk dared to challenge the swordsman. As long as the nirvana state was not broken, the flying sword would be meaningless to him. He would always be in an invincible position. There were gains and losses. The attacks in the nirvana state were very strange. There was no Buddhist power or Buddhist kingdom enchantment, but a more mysterious method. This was completely determined by the characteristics of the monk in the nirvana state. Nirvana was a Sanskrit word. According to the New Translation, it was death, wisdom, and two virtues. Wisdom that had all the blessings was called circle. Life and death that left all troubles was called nirvana. Simply put, all virtues were circle and all troubles were nirvana. In fact, nirvana also referred to the nirvana of nirvana. Becoming a Buddha was to prove this nirvana, so nirvana was not exclusive to Buddhas. However, mortals were always blinded by their dreams, so they could not achieve it. As the saying goes, confusion reverses dreams, and enlightenment leads to nirvana. Dreams were born from one's nirvana and nirvana. If a person could destroy one's dream, he or she would be able to prove one's nirvana, just like how a mirror can see light after removing a speck of dust. Therefore, the attack of nirvana was to destroy one's dream, or rather, to destroy one's nirvana. It was not to end one's life, but to destroy one's future. This kind of attack was meaningless to cultivators without ambitions or dreams. For example, it would not have any effect on a mortal. However, it was everything to these demonic half-immortals of the interior realm. Salted fish could not come here. Those who could come here had dreams, big dreams. Lu Xiaoyi's dream gave the military monk a huge shock. Chapter 1745. When marching monk fought with others, he had also cut off countless people's dreams and countless superego, because he was using the incarnation of Buddha. As long as it was below or at the same level as him, none could escape. Buddha used the nirvana path to become a golden immortal, so he had the ability to cut off the dreams of golden immortals. However, when he tried to cut off Lu Xiaoyi's superego, he realized that he couldn't cut it no matter what. After thinking about it carefully, he realized that this swordsman was really good at blowing his own trumpet. His superego was actually above golden immortal Daluo. He couldn't cut it down due to the limitations of the law. This kind of battle was rather awkward. Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword couldn't cut I'm not mine monk, and marching monk's death couldn't cut through the swordsman's trumpet. Thus, they stared at each other and rolled the dice. Everyone stared at each other. Lu Xiaoyi realized that he couldn't break through the nirvana path, even if it was his 12 great Tao concepts. This was something purely spiritual and couldn't be broken through by the transformation of the path. If he wanted to break it, he would have to master the nirvana path to a certain extent. He didn't dare to think about it now. Before that, he really couldn't do anything to this monk. Marching monk was even more depressed, because when he was in the nirvana path, this move of his would never work on this swordsman. Because his dream construction was lower than the swordsman, the key was that he couldn't change it. He felt that his pie was already very big, but in the world of blowing his own trumpet, the pie was bigger than the pie. There was no such thing as the biggest pie, only bigger pie. How could he dare to think about it? Of course, marching monk had other ways to fight. For example, he could withdraw from the nirvana path and use ordinary Buddhist techniques. This might be effective against other half-immortals, but it wasn't realistic for a swordsman like Lu Xiaoyi. If he really used Buddhist techniques against sword techniques, the only result would be him being beaten into the nirvana path. Both of them immediately realized the insignificance of this battle. At least at their current level, both of them still lacked the means to fight to the death. Pestering was not something that cultivators at their level could do. With a loud laugh, the two of them stopped. "You really dare to dream." The marching monk complained. "I still dare to do it." Lu Xiaoyi boasted shamelessly. The marching monk knew that he was bound to lose this round. Since he couldn't destroy this swordsman physically, he could only think of ways to cooperate with him. Towards this, he didn't have any psychological barriers. If he could kill, then he'd kill. If he couldn't, then he'd negotiate. At their level, they wouldn't make bitter hatred. Of course, even if they'd cooperated this time, it didn't mean that they'd shake hands and make peace. If one day one of them felt confident, then they'd probably kill again. The Tao is very wonderful. There is more separation than reunion. Benefits are divided and reunited to establish a foundation. Take my plate seal and go to Lasu heaven to find the Tonal ancient temple. Within 3 years, we can gather dozens of great Buddhas for you. This is our attitude at Hung River. Lu Xiaoyi didn't refuse. Of course, he couldn't refuse. He was counting on these people to take the lead. Can I tell them what my purpose is? Or should I lead them to a place where you'll tell them? The marching monk laughed coldly. Just tell them the truth. You don't have to worry about keeping it a secret. The follow-up to Hung River is already under our consideration. The only difference is when we'll implement it. With your interference, we'll implement it earlier. Without these accidents, we can cooperate with them a few more times. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. This was also within his expectations. The Buddhism of this world had a deep relationship with the Hung River realm. For example, this nirvana, Tao, actually came from the ancient method of Hung River. The word nirvana was already used in the teachings of Jainism before the birth of the Buddha. It referred to returning to the tranquil Brahman that contained everything and was always happy and pure. In the ancient method of Hung River, nirvana was said to have come out of the world and was proven by the 4 paths of wisdom. It was the fate of Tao and fruit. It was called nirvana because it left behind the entanglement of thirst and love. Its original meaning in Sanskrit was to be extinguished or to be extinguished. Therefore, it meant to extinguish the fire of greed, anger, and infatuation in the world. As long as people were still entangled by thirst and love, they were still bound in the cycle of life and death. However, when they extinguished all their thirst, they would realize nirvana and be free from the cycle of life and death. This was the initial form of nirvana. However, in the long history of Buddhism, everything was changing. The meaning of the scriptures was also changing. It was no longer the only one. There was only one reason for the change. It was suitable for the cultural atmosphere and faith environment of the place where it was spread. Just like the national dishes of his previous world that were spread overseas, there was only one taste left. Sweet and sour fried. The ancient Buddhist Dharma of Hung River was also changing. In the end, the pure Buddhist Dharma began to be suppressed and ostracized. Now, the things that were circulating in Hung River had long become specious, completely separated from the Buddhist Dharma. They had become a combination of the local sects and some supernatural beings. Among the mainstream orthodoxies, not only did the Taoists find it unpleasant, but the Buddhists were even more unpleasant. They were the orthodox Buddhist method that began to claim itself as the orthodox Buddhist method after it spread throughout the universe. This was the relationship between the Buddhists of the main world and the Hung River realm. They were still connected and opposed each other. Because they were still connected, they could help each other. Because once the truth was exposed, the ones that wanted to destroy Hung River the most were these so-called Orthodox Buddhists. The reason why Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xin's plan succeeded was because they saw through all of this. The fundamentals were already like this. How could they go wrong? Hung River's mistake was that they wanted to take advantage of the changes in the universe and the change of eras. They wanted to grab a piece of fat meat between the cracks of the Taoists and Buddhists. This was the most dangerous move. Perhaps they had been keeping a low profile for hundreds of thousands of years. They wanted to take advantage of the great changes in the universe to jump out and make their presence known. They forgot that the so-called Taoists and Buddhists had always been good at picking up soft persimmons. If they couldn't bite through the hard ones, they would look for soft ones to satisfy their hunger. Until the universe returned to peace, Taoism was still Taoism and Buddhism was still Buddhism. However, those who wanted to fish in troubled waters were all gone. How long would it take for you to travel from Luo Sutian to Hung River Realm? Lu Xiaoyi asked. Regarding the movement of troops in the universe, this was a secret of the major powers. Normally, they wouldn't reveal it to others. However, the marching monk knew the purpose of the swordsman's question. This time, this person returned to the main world to gather troops. It involved a lot of people, not only the 5 rings and Luo Sutian, but also many famous realms in the eastern sky and northern sky. For example, Anchor Chain, Floating Sinking, Light, Zhou Xian, Heaven's Choice, etc. This was the procedure. It was an invitation that must be given. Only by inviting them would it be the greatest respect to these realms. Only then would these realms feel that they weren't excluded from the mainstream of cultivation. If you don't invite them, you will offend them. With so many goals, theoretically, it was impossible to complete them in a few hundred years. However, this wasn't something he should be thinking about. This swordsman could use the heavenly eyes to teleport. Therefore, if the itinerary was carefully planned, it wasn't impossible, as long as the 13th fragment didn't collapse too early. Therefore, the itinerary must be understood in order to arrange the order of deployment. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.